We did it. We made it to Friday. Another week. Isn't that great? Another week has come and gone. Here we are. I feel this society waking up to the reality of its abandonment. That we kind of, for the last little bit, like this sort of post-COVID moment, I think there's a lot of people who are sort of hoping that we would transition into a direction. I think that there were a lot of people who have been distracting. There's been a lot of distracting ourselves. I think about like something like Elden Ring, for example, right? Like, I've been playing a lot of this Elden Ring game. I've been really enjoying it. In fact, I think Elden Ring is a great game. But when I play it, I sort of think to myself, this isn't better than other games that were released not that long ago. Really. Like, it's a good game, but it's not like this overwhelmingly huge thing, I think. I just think it came out right in a moment when everybody was looking for some kind of major distraction, something major that they could all commit their time to. And I think Elden Ring came in and was just, it had enough broad appeal, enough good ideas, and also its completion, like the fact that it was a complete experience, I think attracted a lot of people to it. Hey Major, how you doing? And I think there's a lot of people who are just now kind of waking up and going like, oh yeah, like we are being abandoned by the bourgeoisie class. Like, it's, and I'm seeing it more and more. And the people who are defending that abandonment are becoming more and more detached from reality in like major and significant ways. Like, literally the sky is purple. Like, literally, like, and it's becoming more and more staggering to watch. Yeah. Like, when I watch clips, that one clip that I showed earlier in the week that I feel like really floored me, honestly, from Britain Today, is really circulating. Like, I'm seeing it wherever I go. This thing is popping up. Hey, Bumbleguppy, how you doing? And to me, I think the thing that's the most staggering about that is, like, there's that one moment where the young lady, she just, like, doesn't know how to respond. Like, she's literally, and I think she says, like, I can't believe that you would say this. Like, and I feel like that's, like, a real gut-wrenching moment where, like, someone is being confronted with the insipidness of those that are defending the system that's destroying us. And we've got to get over it. Like, we got to get through it. We got to get to the point where we are realizing, like, no, that's who these people are. It's not going to get better. Like, these people aren't going to have that come to Jesus moment. They're not going to come around, right? Like, we've got to accept it, so that when we get into these conversations, we no longer can fool ourselves into believing that these people are good faith actors, because they're not. Like, they're not. Like, we are dealing with, and we're not there yet as a society. We're not there yet. That we want to believe that we're not dealing with a Nazi level threat. And we are. Like, that's, I think a lot of people just can't believe it of their neighbors and of their communities. They can't believe it of their own societies. That we are blowing up into a full-scale Nazi moment. Like full scale. Like and you're gonna see the rallies, you're gonna see all of this kind of stuff. Except it's worse, because this time around, it's not the first time we've done it, but this time around, the people who are seizing power, they don't even care about their own survival, and they don't care about the survival of their own families. Like, even the Nazis cared about their own country, right? They cared about themselves. Yeah. People can't believe it. And every rationalization and denial under the sun is thrown up to deny it. Yeah. Because it's such a big problem, right? It's such an enormous thing that we're confronted with. And the denial is the worst part, in my view. Like, I think that there are obviously completely bad actors who need to be incarcerated. People who knew, people who were informed, people who were in positions of power, who understood the stakes and who understood what was going on and have decided that their own personal wealth matters more to them. Right? Like, and those people should be incarcerated. And until they are incarcerated, we cannot believe that we as a culture are taking climate change seriously. Like, you wouldn't believe that our society was taking the murder of your family seriously if we just let the killer walk around, right? Even if everybody acknowledged it, right? Even if everybody said, like, yeah, that guy killed your family, right? Well, what are we doing about it? Nothing? Oh, okay. Well, then it's up to me. And that's more or less the position we're in. That's more or less the position we're in now. And I never know what I'm going to talk about when I start this up, you know? Like, I never know how I'm going to open it up. I just kind of start talking and see what happens. And today, because, like, I've been living in a kind of depressive fugue for this past week. Like, all of my work has stopped. All of my work outside of this channel has essentially stopped. Because I feel staggered. I feel completely staggered. Like, we are going to witness towns burn down. We are going to witness droughts, mass flooding, sea levels rising. Vestland, don't know if I've ever seen you here before, Vestland. Good to see you. Good opening. Nice little heart. Bless you. Bless you for being here. Hope you're here to contribute in a beautiful way. Because we're just marching towards it. And the people who are raising their voices, are now simply being told to be quiet. That's it. That it's no longer, well, the science isn't in. Everybody acknowledges that the science is in. Right? The science is in. Just shut up about it, though. And that's essentially what we're being told. Like, what can be said about this any longer? Harry, Eric, good to see you guys. Took me a couple of years just to get my wife to mute commercials on TV. She resisted it irrationally, like everyone I have ever known. If you can't do even that, how can you challenge the powerful? Yeah. Yeah. Like, I think I'm going to pivot into this article here. This is from The Atlantic. Why the past 10 years of American life have been uniquely stupid. It's not just a phase. This is by Jonathan Haidt. Illustrations by Nicholas Ortega. It's actually really beautiful. What would it have been like to live in Babel in the days after its destruction? In the book of Genesis, we are told that the descendants of Noah built a great city in the land of Shinar. They built a tower with its top in the heavens to make a name for themselves. God was offended by the hubris of humanity and said, "Look, they are one people, and they have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. Nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language there, so that they will not understand one another's speech." The text does not say that God destroyed the tower, but in many popular renderings of the story he does. So let's hold that dramatic image in our minds, people wandering amid the ruins, unable to communicate, condemned to mutual incomprehension. The story of Babel is the best metaphor I have found for what happened to America in the 2010, and for the fractured country we now inhabit. Something went terribly wrong very suddenly. We're disoriented, unable to speak the same language or recognize the same truth. We are cut off from one another and from the past. It's been quite clear for a while now that Red America and Blue America are becoming like two different countries, claiming the same territory, with two different versions of the Constitution, economics, and American history. But Babel is not a story about tribalism. It's a story about the fragmentation of everything. It's about the shattering of all that had seemed solid, the scattering of people who had been a community. It's a metaphor for what is happening not only between red and blue, but within the left and within the right, as well as within universities, companies, professional associations, museums, and even families. Babel is a metaphor for what some forms of social media have done to nearly all of the groups and institutions most important to the country's future, and to us as a people. How did this happen? And what does it portend for American life? The rise of the modern power. There is a direction to history, and it is toward cooperation at larger scales. We see this trend in biological evolution in a series of major transitions through which multicellular organisms first appeared and then developed new symbiotic relationships. We see it in cultural evolution too, as Robert Wright explained in his 1990 book, Non-Zero, The Logic of Human Destiny. Wright showed that history involves a series of transitions, driven by rising population density plus new technologies, writing, roads, the printing press, that created new possibilities for mutually beneficial trade and learning. Zero-sum conflicts, such as the wars of religion that arose as the printing press spread heretical ideas across Europe, were better thought of as temporary setbacks, and sometimes even integral to progress. Those wars of religion, he argued, made possible the transition to modern nation-states, which better informed citizens. President Bill Clinton praised Non-Zero's optimistic portrayal of a more cooperative future, thanks to continued technological advance. What are you complaining about? You got so much peanut butter, dude. What are you complaining about, my little guy? Got a little pug just staring right at me. The early internet of the 1990s, with its chat rooms, message boards, and email, exemplified the non-zero thesis, as did the first wave of social media platforms, which launched around 2003. MySpace, Friendster, and Facebook made it easy to connect with friends and strangers and talk about common interests for free at a scale never before imaginable. By 2008, Facebook had emerged as the dominant platform, with more than 100 million monthly users, on its way to roughly 3 billion today. In the first decade of the new century, social media was widely believed to be a boon to democracy. What dictator could impose his will on an interconnected citizenry? What regime could build a wall to keep out the internet? The high point of techno-democratic optimism was arguably 2011, a year that began with the Arab Spring and ended with the global Occupy movement. That is also when Google Translate became available on virtually all smartphones, so you could say that 2011 was the year that humanity rebuilt the Tower of Babel. We were closer than we had ever been to being one people, and we had effectively overcome the curse of division by language. For techno-democratic optimists, it seemed to be the beginning of what humanity could do. In February 2012, as he prepared to take Facebook public, Mark Zuckerberg reflected on those extraordinary times and set forth his plans. "Today our society has reached another tipping point," he wrote in a letter to investors. "Facebook hoped to rewire the way people spread and consume information. By giving them the power to share, it would help them once again transform many of our core institutions and industries." In the 10 years since then, Zuckerberg did exactly what he said he would do. He did rewire the way we spread and consume information. He did transform our institutions, and he pushed us past the tipping point. It has not worked out as he expected. Things fall apart. Historically, civilizations have relied on shared blood, gods, and enemies to counteract the tendency to split apart as they grow. But what is it that holds together large and diverse secular democracies, such as the United States and India, or, for that matter, modern Britain and France? Social scientists have identified at least 3 major forces that collectively bind together successful democracies: social capital, extensive social networks with high levels of trust, strong institutions, and shared stories. Social media has weakened all 3. To see how, we must understand how social media changed over time, and especially in the several years following 2009. In their early incarnations, platforms such as MySpace and Facebook were relatively harmless. They allowed users to create pages on which to post photos, family updates, and links to the mostly static pages of their friends and favorite bands. In this way, early social media can be seen as just another step in the long progression of technological improvements, from the postal service through the telephone to email and texting, that helped people achieve the eternal goal of maintaining their social ties. But gradually, social media users became more comfortable sharing intimate details of their lives with strangers and corporations. As I wrote in a 2019 Atlantic article with Tobias Rose Stockwell, they became more adept at putting on performances and managing their personal brand, activities that might impress others, but that do not deepen friendships in the way that a private phone conversation will. Once social media platforms had trained users to spend more time platforming and less time connecting, the stage was set for the major transformation, which began in 2009, the intensification of viral dynamics. Before 2009, Facebook had given users a simple timeline, a never-ending stream of content generated by their friends and connections, with the newest posts at the top and the oldest ones at the bottom. This was often overwhelming in its volume, but it was an accurate reflection of what others were posting. That began to change in 2009, when Facebook offered users a way to publicly like posts with the click of a button. That same year, Twitter introduced something even more powerful, the retweet button, which allowed users to publicly endorse a post while also sharing it with all of their followers. Facebook soon copied that innovation with its own share button, which became available to smartphone users in 2012. Like and share buttons quickly became the standard features of most other platforms. Shortly after its like button began to produce data about what best engaged its users, Facebook developed algorithms to bring each user the content most likely to generate a like or some other interaction, eventually including the share as well. Later research showed that posts that trigger emotions, especially anger at outgroups, are the most likely to be shared. By 2003, social media had become a new game, with dynamics unlike those in 2008. If you were skillful or lucky, you might create a post that would go viral and make you internet famous for a few days. If you blundered, you could find yourself buried in hateful comments. Your posts rode to fame or ignominy based on the clicks of thousands of strangers, and you, in turn, contributed thousands of clicks to the game. This new game encouraged dishonesty and mob dynamics. Users were guided not just by their true preferences, but by their past experiences of reward and punishment, and their prediction of how others would react to each new action. One of the engineers at Twitter who had worked on the retweet button later revealed that he regretted his contribution because it had made Twitter a nastier place. As he watched Twitter mobs forming through the use of the new tool, he thought to himself, "We might have just handed a 4-year-old a loaded weapon." As a social psychologist who studies emotion, morality, and politics, I saw this happening too. The newly tweaked platforms were almost perfectly designed to bring out our most moralistic and least reflective selves. The volume of outrage was shocking. It was just this kind of twitchy and explosive spread of anger that James Madison had tried to protect us from as he was drafting the U.S. Constitution. The framers of the Constitution were excellent social psychologists. They knew that democracy had an Achilles heel because it depended on the collective judgment of the people, and democratic communities are subject to the turbulency and weakness of unruly passions. The key to designing a sustainable republic, therefore, was to build in mechanisms to slow things down, cool passions, require compromise, and give leaders some insulation from the mania of the moment, while still holding them accountable to the people, periodically, on election day. The tech companies that enhanced virality from 2009 to 2012 brought us deep into Madison's nightmare. Many authors quote his comments in Federalist Number 10 on the innate human proclivity towards faction, by which he meant our tendency to divide ourselves into teams, or parties, that are so inflamed with mutual animosity that they are much more disposed to vex and oppress each other than to cooperate for their common good. But that essay continues on to a less quoted yet equally important insight about democracy's vulnerability to triviality. Madison notes that people are so prone to factionalism that, where no substantial occasion presents itself, the most frivolous and fanciful distinctions have been sufficient to kindle their unfriendly passions and excite their most violent conflicts. Social media has both magnified and weaponized the frivolous. Is our democracy any healthier now that we've had Twitter brawls over Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's Tax the Rich dress at the annual Met Gala, and Melania Trump's dress at a 9/11 memorial event, which had stitching that kind of looked like a skyscraper? How about Senator Ted Cruz's tweet criticizing Big Bird for tweeting about getting his COVID vaccine? It's not just the waste of time and the scarce attention that matters. It's the continual chipping away of trust. An autocracy can deploy propaganda or use fear to motivate the behaviors it desires, but a democracy depends on widely internalized acceptance of the legitimacy of rules, norms, and institutions. Blind and irrevocable trust in any particular individual or organization is never warranted. But when citizens lose trust in elected leaders, health authorities, the courts, the police, universities, and the integrity of elections, then every decision becomes contested. Every election becomes a life and death struggle to save the country from the other side. The most recent Edelman Trust Barometer, an international measure of citizens' trust in government, business, media, and non-governmental organizations, showed stable and competent autocracies, China and the United Arab Emirates, at the top of the list, while contentious democracies such as the United States, the United Kingdom, Spain, and South Korea scored near the bottom, albeit above Russia. Recent academic studies suggest that social media is indeed corrosive to trust in new governments, news media, and people and institutions in general. A working paper that offers the most comprehensive review of the research, led by the social scientist Philip Lorenz Spreen and Lisa Oswald, concludes that the majority of reported associations between digital media use and trust appear to be detrimental for democracy. The literature is complex. Some studies show benefits, particularly in less developed democracies, but the review found that on balance, social media amplifies political polarization, foments populism, especially right-wing populism, and is associated with the spread of misinformation. Mr. Milo, what are you whining at me for? What are you whining at me for? There's so much peanut butter. What are you doing? Little guy's just whining at me. When people lose trust in institutions, they lose trust in the stories told by those institutions. That's particularly true of the institutions entrusted with the education of children. History curricula have often caused political controversy, but Facebook and Twitter make it possible for parents to become outraged every day over a new snippet from their children's history lessons and math lessons and literature selections, and any new pedagogical shift anywhere in the country. The motives of teachers and administrators come into question, and overreaching laws or curricular reforms sometimes follow, dumbing down education and reducing trust in it further. One result is that young people educated in the post-Babel era are less likely to arrive at a coherent story of who we are as a people, and less likely to share any such story with those who attended different schools, who were educated in a different decade. The former CIA analyst Martin Gurri predicted these fracturing effects in his 2014 book, The Revolt of the Republic. Gurri's analysis focused on the authority-subverting effects of information's exponential growth, beginning with the internet in the 1990s. Writing nearly a decade ago, Gurri could already see the power of social media as a universal solvent, breaking down bonds and weakening institutions everywhere it reached. He noted that distributed networks can protest and overthrow, but never govern. He described the nihilism of the many protest movements of the 2011 that organized mostly online and that, like Occupy Wall Street, demanded the destruction of existing institutions without offering an alternative vision of the future or an organization that could bring it about. Gurri is no fan of elites or of centralized authority, but he notes a constructive feature of the pre-digital era, a single mass audience, all consuming the same content, as if they were all looking into the same gigantic mirror at the reflection of their own society. In a comment to Vox that recalls the first post-Babel diaspora, he said, "The digital revolution has shattered that mirror, and now the public inhabits those broken pieces of glass. So the public isn't one thing. It's highly fragmented, and it's basically mutually hostile. It's mostly people yelling at each other and living in bubbles of one sort or another." Mark Zuckerberg may not have wished for any of that, but by rewiring everything in a headlong rush for growth, with a naive conception of human psychology, little understanding of the intricacy of institutions, and no concern for external costs imposed on society, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and a few other large platforms unwittingly dissolved the mortar of trust, belief in institutions, and shared stories that had held a large and diverse secular democracy together. I think we can date the fall of the tower to the years between 2011, Gurri's focal year of nihilistic protests, and 2015, a year marked by the Great Awakening on the left and the ascendancy of Donald Trump on the right. Trump did not destroy the tower, he merely exploited its fall. He was the first politician to master the new dynamics of the post-Babel era, in which outrage is the key to virality, stage performance crushes competence, Twitter can overpower all the newspapers in the country, and stories cannot be shared, or at least trusted, across more than a few adjacent fragments. So truth cannot achieve widespread adherence. The many analysts, including me, who had argued that Trump could not win the general election, were relying on pre-Babel intuitions, which said that scandals such as the Access Hollywood tape, in which Trump boasted about committing sexual assault, are fatal to a presidential campaign. But after Babel, nothing really means anything anymore, at least not in a way that is durable and on which people widely agree. Politics after Babel. Politics is the art of the possible, the German statesman Otto von Bismarck said in 1867. In a post-Babel democracy, not much may be possible. Of course, the American culture war and the decline of cross-party cooperation predates social media's arrival. The mid-20th century was a time of unusually low polarization in Congress, which began reverting back to historical levels in the 1970s and 80s. The ideological distance between the two parties began increasing faster in the 1990s. Fox News and the 1994 Republican Revolution converted the GOP into a more combative party. For example, House Speaker Newt Gingrich discouraged new Republican members of Congress from moving their families to Washington, D.C., where they were likely to form social ties with Democrats and their families. So cross-party relationships were already strained before 2009, but the enhanced virality of social media thereafter made it more hazardous to be seen fraternizing with the enemy or even failing to attack the enemy with sufficient vigor. On the right, the term rhino, Republican in name only, was superseded in 2015 by the more contemptuous term, cuckservative, popularized on Twitter by Trump supporters. On the left, social media launched call-out culture in the years after 2012, with transformative effects on university life, and later on politics and culture throughout the English-speaking world. What changed in the 2010s? Let's revisit that Twitter engineer's metaphor of handing a loaded gun to a 4-year-old. A mean tweet doesn't kill anyone. It is an attempt to shame or punish someone publicly while broadcasting one's own virtue, brilliance, or tribal loyalties. It's more a dart than a bullet, causing pain but no fatalities. Even so, from 2009 to 2012, Facebook and Twitter passed out roughly 1 billion dart guns globally. We've been shooting one another ever since. Social media has given voice to some people who had little previously, and it has made it easier to hold powerful people accountable for their misdeeds, not just in politics, but in business, the arts, academia, and elsewhere. Sexual harassers could have been called out in anonymous blog posts before Twitter, but it's hard to imagine that the Me Too movement would have been nearly so successful without the viral enhancement that the major platforms offered. However, the warped accountability of social media has also brought injustice and political dysfunction in 3 ways. First, the dart guns of social media give more power to trolls and provocateurs while silencing good citizens. Research by the political scientist Alexander Bohr and Michael Bang-Peterson found that a small subset of people on social media platforms are highly concerned with gaining status and are willing to use aggression to do so. They admit that in their online discussions they often curse, make fun of their opponents, and get blocked by other users or reported for inappropriate comments. Across 8 studies, Bohr and Peterson found that being online did not make most people more aggressive or hostile. Rather, it allowed a small number of aggressive people to attack a much larger set of victims. Even a small number of jerks were able to dominate discussion forums, Bohr and Peterson found, because non-jerks are easily turned off from online discussions of politics. Additional research finds that women and black people are harassed disproportionately, so the digital public square is less welcoming to their voices. Second, the dart guns of social media give more power and voice to the political extremes, while reducing the power and voice of the moderate majority. The Hidden Tribes study by the pro-democracy group More in Common surveyed 8,000 Americas in 2017 and 2018 and identified 7 groups that shared beliefs and behaviors. The one furthest to the right, known as the devoted conservatives, comprised 6% of the U.S. population. The group furthest to the left, the progressive activists, comprised 8% of the population. The progressive activists were by far the most prolific group on social media. 70% had shared political content over the previous year. The devoted conservatives followed at 56%. These two extreme groups are similar in surprising ways. They are the whitest and richest of the 7 groups, which suggest that America is being torn apart by a battle between 2 subsets of the elite who are not representative of the broader society. What's more, they are the 2 groups that show the greatest homogeneity in their moral and political attitudes. This uniformity of opinion, the study's authors speculate, is likely a result of thought policing on social media. Those who express sympathy for the views of the opposing groups may experience backlash from their own cohort. In other words, political extremists don't just shoot darts at their enemies, they spend a lot of their ammunition targeting dissenters or nuanced thinkers on their own team. In this way, social media makes a political system based on compromise grind to a halt. Finally, by giving everyone a dart gun, social media deputizes everyone to administer justice with no due process. Platforms like Twitter devolve into the Wild West, with no accountability for vigilantes. A successful attack attracts a barrage of likes and follow-on strikes. Enhanced virality platforms thereby facilitate massive collective punishment for small or imagined offenses, with real-world consequences, including innocent people losing their jobs and being shamed into suicide. When our public square is governed by mob dynamics, unrestrained by due process, we don't get justice and inclusion. We get a society that ignores context, proportionality, mercy, and truth. Structural stupidity. Since the tower fell, debates of all kinds have grown more and more confused. The most persuasive obstacle, or the most pervasive obstacle, to good thinking is confirmation bias, which refers to the human tendency to search only for evidence that confirms our preferred beliefs. Even before the advent of social media, search engines were supercharging confirmation bias, making it far easier for people to find evidence for absurd beliefs and conspiracy theories, such as that the Earth is flat and that the US government staged the 9/11 attacks. But social media made things much worse. The most reliable cure for confirmation bias is interaction with people who don't share your beliefs. They confront you with counter-evidence and counter-argument. John Stuart Mill said, "He who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that," and he urged us to seek out conflicting views from persons who actually believe them. People who think differently and are willing to speak up if they disagree with you make you smarter, almost as if they are extensions of your own brain. People who try to silence or intimidate their critics make themselves stupider, almost as if they are shooting darts into their own brain. In his book, The Constitution of Knowledge, Jonathan Roch describes the historical breakthrough in which Western societies developed an epistemic operating system. That is, a set of institutions for generating knowledge from the interactions of biased and cognitively flawed individuals. English law developed the adversarial system so that biased advocates could present both sides of a case to an impartial jury. Newspapers full of lies evolved into professional journalistic enterprises, with norms that required seeking out multiple sides of a story, followed by editorial review, followed by fact-checking. Universities evolved from cloistered medieval institutions into research powerhouses, creating a structure in which scholars put forth evidence-backed claims, with the knowledge that other scholars around the world would be motivated to gain prestige by finding contrary evidence. Part of America's greatness in the 20th century came from having developed the most capable, vibrant, and productive network of knowledge-producing institutions in all of human history, linking together the world's best universities, private companies that turn scientific advances into life-changing consumer products, and government agencies that supported scientific research and led the collaboration that put people on the moon. But this arrangement, Roch notes, is not self-maintaining. It relies on an array of sometimes delicate social settings and understandings, and those need to be understood, affirmed, and protected. So what happens when an institution is not well maintained and internal disagreement ceases, either because its people have become ideologically uniform or because they have become afraid to dissent? This, I believe, is what happened to many of America's key institutions in the mid to late 2010s. They got stupider en masse because social media instilled in their members a chronic fear of getting darted. The shift was most pronounced in universities, scholarly associations, creative industries, and political organizations at every level, national, state, and local. And it was so pervasive that it established new behavioral norms backed by new policies, seemingly overnight. The new omnipresence of enhanced virality, social media meant that a single word uttered by a professor, leader, or journalist, even if spoken with positive intent, could lead to a social media firestorm, triggering an immediate dismissal or a drawn-out investigation by the institution. Participants in our key institutions began self-censoring to an unhealthy degree, holding back critiques of policies and ideas, even those presented in class by their students, that they believed to be ill-supported and wrong. But when an institution punishes internal dissent, it shoots darts into its own brain. The stupefying process plays out differently on the right and the left because their activist wings subscribe to different narratives with different sacred values. The Hidden Tribes Studies tells us that the devoted conservatives score highest on beliefs related to authoritarianism. They share a narrative in which America is eternally under threat from enemies outside and subversives within. They see life as a battle between patriots and traitors. According to the political scientist Karen Stenner, whose work the Hidden Tribes study drew upon, they are psychologically different from the larger group of traditional conservatives, 19% of the population, who emphasize order, decorum, and slow rather than radical change. Only within the devoted conservatives' narrative do Donald Trump's speeches make sense, from his campaign's ominous opening diatribe about Mexican rapists to his warning on January 6, 2021. If you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. The traditional punishment for treason is death, hence the battle cry on January 6th, hang Mike Pence. Right-wing death threats, many delivered by anonymous accounts, are proving effective in cowing traditional conservatives. For example, in driving out local election officials who failed to stop the steal. The wave of threats delivered to dissenting Republican members of Congress has similarly pushed many of the remaining moderates to quit or go silent, giving us a party ever more divorced from the conservative tradition, constitutional responsibility, and reality. We now have a Republican Party that describes a violent assault on the U.S. Capitol as legitimate political discourse, supported, or at least not contradicted, by an array of right-wing think tanks and media organizations. The stupidity on the right is most visible in the many conspiracy theories spreading across right-wing media and now into Congress. Pizzagate, QAnon, the belief that vaccines contain microchips, the conviction that Donald Trump won re-election. It's hard to imagine any of these ideas or belief systems reaching the levels that they have without Twitter and Facebook. The Democrats have also been hit hard by structural stupidity, though in a different way. In the Democratic Party, the struggle between the progressive wing and the more moderate factions is open and ongoing, and often the moderates win. The problem is that the left controls the commanding heights of the culture: universities, news organizations, Hollywood, arts museums, advertising, much of Silicon Valley, and the teachers' unions and teaching colleges that shape K-12 education. And in many of those institutions, dissent has been stifled. When everyone was issued a dart gun in early 2010s, many left-leaning institutions began shooting themselves in the brain. And unfortunately, those were the brains that inform, instruct, and entertain most of the country. Liberals in the late 20th century shared a belief that the sociologist Christian Smith called the liberal progressive narrative, in which America used to be horrifically unjust and repressive, but thanks to the struggles of activists and heroes, has made, and continues to make, progress towards realizing the noble promise of its founding. The story easily supports liberal patriotism, and it was the animating narrative of Barack Obama's presidency. It is also the view of the traditional liberals in the Hidden Tribes study, 11% of the population, who have strong humanitarian values, are older than average, and are largely the people leading America's cultural and intellectual institutions. But when the newly viralized social media platforms gave everyone a dart gun, it was younger progressive activists who did the most shooting, and they aimed a disproportionate number of their darts at the older liberal leaders. Confused and fearful, the leaders rarely challenged the activists or their non-liberal narrative, in which life and every institution is an internal battle among identity groups over a zero-sum pie, and the people on top got there by oppressing the people on the bottom. This new narrative is rigidly egalitarian, focused on equality of outcomes, not on the rights or not of rights or opportunities. It is unconcerned with individual rights. The universal charge against people who disagree with this narrative is not traitor, it is racist, transphobe, Karen, or some related scarlet letter, marking the perpetrator as one who hates or harms a marginalized group. The punishment that feels right for such crimes is not execution, it is public shaming and social death. You can see the stupefaction process most clearly when a person on the left merely points to research that questions or contradicts a favored belief among progressive activists. Someone on Twitter will find a way to associate the dissenter with racism, and others will pile on. For example, in the first week of protests after the killing of George Floyd, some of which included violence, the progressive policy analyst David Shore, when employed by civic analysts, tweeted a link to a study showing that violent protests back in the 1960s led to electoral setbacks for the Democrats in nearby counties. Shore was clearly trying to be helpful, but in the ensuing outrage he was accused of anti-blackness and was soon dismissed from his job. Civics Analytics has denied that this tweet led to Shore's firing. The Shore case became famous, but anyone on Twitter has already seen dozens of examples teaching the basic lesson. Don't question your own side's beliefs, policies, or actions. When the traditional liberals go silent, as so many did in the summer of 2020, the progressive activists' more radical narrative takes over as the governing narrative of an organization. This is why so many epistemic institutions seemed to go woke in rapid succession that year and the next, beginning with a wave of controversies and resignations at the New York Times and other papers, and continuing on to social justice pronouncements by groups of doctors and medical associations. One publication by the American Medical Association and the Association of American Medical Colleges, for instance, advised medical professionals to refer to neighborhoods and communities as oppressed or systematically divested instead of vulnerable or poor, and the hurried transformation of curricula at New York City's most expensive private schools. Tragically, we see stupefaction playing out on both sides in the COVID wars. The right has been so committed to minimizing the risks of COVID that it has turned the disease into one that preferentially kills Republicans. The progressive left is so committed to maximizing the dangers of COVID that it often embraces an equally maximalist, one-size-fits-all strategy for vaccines, masks, and social distancing, even as they pertain to children. Such policies are not as deadly as spreading fears and lies about vaccines, but many of them have been devastating for the mental health and education of children, who desperately need to play with one another and go to school. We have little clear evidence that school closures and masks for young children reduce deaths from COVID. Most notably, for the story I'm telling here, progressive parents who argued against school closures were frequently savaged on social media and met with the ubiquitous leftist accusations of racism and white supremacy. Others in blue cities learned to keep quiet. American politics is getting ever more ridiculous and dysfunctional, not because Americans are getting less intelligent. The problem is structural. Thanks to enhanced virality, social media, dissent is punished within many of our institutions, which means that bad ideas get elevated into official policy. It's going to get much worse. In a 2018 interview, Steve Bannon, the former advisor to Donald Trump, said that the way to deal with the media is to flood the zone with shit. He was describing the fire hose of falsehood tactic, pioneered by Russian disinformation programs to keep Americans confused, disoriented, and angry. But back then, in 2018, there was an upper limit to the amount of shit available, because all of it had to be created by a person, other than some low-quality stuff produced by bots. Now, however, artificial intelligence is close to enabling the limitless spread of highly believable disinformation. The AI program GPT-3 is already so good that you can give it a topic and a tone and it will spit out as many essays as you like, typically with perfect grammar and a surprising level of coherence. In a year or two, when the program is upgraded to GP4, it will become far more capable. In a 2020 essay titled "The Supply of Disinformation Will Soon Be Infinite," Renee DiResta, the research manager at the Stratford Internet Observatory, explained that spreading falsehoods, whether through text, images, or deepfake videos, will quickly become inconceivably easy. She co-wrote the essay with GPT-3. American factions won't be the only ones using AI and social media to generate attack content. Our adversaries will too. In a haunting 2018 essay titled "The Digital Maginot Line," DiResta described the state of affairs bluntly. We are immersed in an evolving, ongoing conflict, an information world war in which state actors, terrorists, and ideological extremists leverage the social infrastructure underpinning everyday life to sow discord and erode shared reality, she wrote. The Soviets used to have to send over agents or cultivate Americans willing to do their bidding, but social media made it cheap and easy for Russia's Internet Research Agency to invent fake events or distort real ones, to stoke rage on both the left and right, often over race. Later research showed that an intensive campaign began on Twitter in 2013, but soon spread to Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, among other platforms. One of the major goals was to polarize the American public and spread distrust, to split us apart at the exact weak point that Madison had identified. We now know that it's not just the Russians attacking American democracy. Before the 2019 protests in Hong Kong, China had mostly focused on domestic platforms such as WeChat. But now China is discovering how much it can do with Twitter and Facebook, for so little money in its escalating conflicts with the US. Given China's own advances in AI, we can expect it to become more skillful over the next few years at further dividing America and further uniting China. In the 20th century, America's shared identity as the country leading the fight to make the world safe for democracy was a strong force that helped keep the culture and the polity together. In the 21st century, America's tech companies have rewired the world and created new products that now appear to be corrosive to democracy, obstacles to shared understanding, and destroyers of the modern tower. Democracy after Babel. We can never return to the way things were in the pre-digital age. The norms, institutions, and forms of political participation that developed during the long era of mass communication are not going to work well, now that technology has made everything so much faster and more multi-directional, and when bypassing professional gatekeepers is so easy. And yet, American democracy is now operating outside the bounds of sustainability. If we do not make major changes soon, then our institutions, our political systems, and our society may collapse during the next major war, pandemic, financial meltdown, or constitutional crisis. What changes are needed? Redesigning democracy for the digital age is far beyond my abilities, but I can suggest 3 categories of reform. 3 goals that must be achieved if democracy is to remain viable in the post-Babel era. We must harden democratic institutions so they can withstand chronic anger and mistrust, reform social media so that it becomes less socially corrosive, and better prepare the next generation for democratic citizenship in this new age. Harden democratic institutions. Political polarization is likely to increase for the foreseeable future. Thus, whatever else we do, we must reform key institutions so that they can continue to function even if levels of anger, misinformation, and violence increase far above those we have today. For instance, the legislative branch was designed to require compromise, yet Congress, social media, and partisan cable news channels have co-evolved such that any legislator who reaches across the aisle may face outrage within hours from the extreme wing of her party, damaging her fundraising prospects and raising her risk of being primaried in the next election cycle. Reforms should reduce the outsized influence of angry extremists and make legislators more responsive to the average voter in their district. One example of such a reform is to end closed party primaries, replacing them with a single, nonpartisan, open primary from which the top several candidates advance to a general election that also uses ranked choice voting. A version of this voting system has already been implemented in Alaska, and it seems to have given Senator Lisa Murkowski more latitude to oppose former President Trump, whose favored candidate would be a threat to Murkowski in a closed Republican primary, but is not in an open one. A second way to harden democratic institutions is to reduce the power of either political party to game the system in its favor, for example, by drawing its preferred electoral districts or selecting the officials who will supervise elections. These jobs should all be done in a nonpartisan way. Research on procedural justice shows that when people perceive that a process is fair, they are more likely to accept the legitimacy of a decision that goes against their interests. Just think of the damage already done to the Supreme Court's legitimacy by the Senate Republican leadership when it blocked consideration of Merrick Garland for a seat that opened up 9 months before the 2019 election, and then rushed through the appointment of Amy Coney Barrett in 2020. A widely discussed reform would end this political gamesmanship by having justices serve staggering 18-year terms so that each president makes one appointment every 2 years. Reform social media. A democracy cannot survive if its public squares are placed where people fear speaking up and where no stable consensus can be reached. Social media's empowerment of the far left, the far right, domestic trolls, and foreign agents is creating a system that looks less like democracy and more like rule by the most aggressive. But it is within our power to reduce social media's ability to dissolve trust and foment structural stupidity. Reforms should limit the platform's amplification of the aggressive fringes while giving more voice to what More in Common calls the exhausted majority. Those who oppose regulation of social media generally focus on the legitimate concern that government-mandated content restrictions will, in practice, devolve into censorship. But the main problem with social media is not that some people post fake or toxic stuff. It's that fake and outrage-inducing content can now attain a level of reach and influence that was not possible before 2009. The Facebook whistleblower, Frances Haugen, advocates for simple changes to the architecture of the platforms. rather than for massive and ultimately futile efforts to police all content. For example, she has suggested modifying the share function on Facebook so that after any content has been shared twice, the third person in the chain must take the time to copy and paste the content into a new post. Reforms like this are not censorship. They are viewpoint neutral and content neutral, and they work equally well in all languages. They don't stop anyone from saying anything. They just slow the spread of content that is, on average, less likely to be true. Perhaps the biggest single change that would reduce the toxicity of existing platforms would be user verification as a precondition to gaining the algorithmic amplification that social media offers. Banks and other industries have know your customer rules, so they can't do business with anonymous clients laundering money from criminal enterprises. Large social media platforms should be required to do the same. That does not mean users would have to post under their real names. They could still use a pseudonym. It just means that before a platform spreads your words to millions of people, it has an obligation to verify, perhaps through a third party or nonprofit, that you are a real human being in a particular country and are old enough to be using the platform. This one change would wipe out most of the hundreds of millions of bots and fake accounts that currently pollute the major platforms. It would also likely reduce the frequency of death threats, rape threats, racist nastiness, and trolling more generally. Research shows that antisocial behavior becomes more common online when people feel that their identity is unknown and untraceable. In any case, the growing evidence that social media is damaging democracy is sufficient to warrant greater oversight by a regulatory body, such as the Federal Communications Commission or the Federal Trade Commission. One of the first orders of business should be compelling the platforms to share their data and their algorithms with academic researchers. Prepare the next generation. The members of Gen Z, those born in and after 1997, bear none of the blame for the mess we are in, but they are going to inherit it, and the preliminary signs are that older generations have prevented them from learning how to handle it. Childhood has become more tightly circumscribed in recent generations, with less opportunity for free, unstructured play, less unsupervised time outside, more time online. Whatever else the effects of these shifts, they have likely impeded the development of abilities needed for effective self-governance for many young adults. Unsupervised free play is nature's way of teaching young mammals the skills they'll need as adults, which for humans include the ability to cooperate, make and enforce rules, compromise, adjudicate conflicts, and accept defeat. A brilliant 2015 essay by the economist Stephen Horwitz argued that free play prepares children for the art of association, that Alexis de Tocqueville said was the key to vibrancy of American democracy. He also argued that its loss posed a serious threat to liberal societies. A generation prevented from learning these social skills, Horwitz warned, would habitually appeal to authorities to resolve disputes and would suffer from a coercioning of social interaction that would create a world of more conflict and violence. And while social media has eroded the art of association throughout society, it may be leaving its deepest and most enduring marks on adolescents. A surge in rates of anxiety, depression, and self-harm among American teens began suddenly in the early 2010s. The same thing happened to Canadian and British teens at the same time. The cause is not known, but the timing points to social media as a substantial contributor. The surge began just as the large majority of American teens became daily users of the major platforms. Correlational and experimental studies back up the connection to depression and anxiety, as do reports from young people themselves, and from Facebook's own research, as reported in the Wall Street Journal. Depression makes people less likely to want to engage with new people, ideas, and experiences. Anxiety makes new things seem more threatening. As these conditions have risen and the lessons on nuanced social behavior learned through free play have been delayed, tolerance for diverse viewpoints and the ability to work out disputes have diminished among many young people. For example, University communities that could tolerate a range of speakers as recently as 2010 arguably began to lose that ability in subsequent years, as Gen Z began to arrive on campus. Attempts to disinvite visiting speakers rose. Students did not just say that they disagreed with visiting speakers. Some said that those lectures would be dangerous, emotionally devastating, a form of violence. Because rates of teen depression and anxiety have continued to rise into the 2020s, we should expect these views to continue in the generations to follow, and indeed to become more severe. The most important change we can make to reduce the damaging effects of social media on children is to delay entry until they've passed through puberty. Congress should update the Children Online Privacy Protection Act, which unwisely set the age of so-called internet adulthood, the age at which companies can collect personal information from children without parental consent, at 13 back in 1998, while making little provision for effective enforcement. The age should be raised to at least 16, and companies should be held responsible for enforcing it. More generally, to prepare the members for the next generation for post-Babel democracy, perhaps the most important thing we can do is let them out to play. Stop starving children of the experiences they most need to become good citizens. Free play in mixed age groups of children with minimal adult supervision. Every state should follow the lead of Utah, Oklahoma, and Texas, and pass a version of the free-range parenting law that helps assure parents that they will not be investigated for neglect if their 8 or 9-year-old children are spotted playing in a park. With such laws in place, schools, educators, and public health authorities should then encourage parents to let their kids walk to school and play in groups outside, just as more kids used to do. Hope after Babel. The story I have told is bleak, and there is little evidence to suggest that America will return to some semblance of normalcy or stability in the next 5 or 10 years. Which side is going to become conciliatory? What is the likelihood that Congress will enact major reforms that strengthen democratic institutions or detoxify social media? Yet when we look away from our dysfunctional federal government, disconnect from social media, and talk with our neighbors directly, things seem more hopeful. Most Americans in the More in Common report are members of the exhausted majority, which is tired of the fighting and is willing to listen to the other side and compromise. Most Americans now see that social media is having a negative impact on the country and are becoming more aware of its damaging effects on children. Will we do anything about it? When Tocqueville toured the United States in the 1830s, he was impressed by the American habit of forming voluntary associations to fix local problems, rather than waiting for kings or nobles to act as Europeans would do. That habit is still with us today. In recent years, Americans have started hundreds of groups and organizations dedicated to building trust and friendship across the political divide, including Bridge USA, Braver Angels, on whose board I serve, and many others listed at bridgealliance.us. We cannot expect Congress and tech companies to save us. We must change ourselves and our communities. What would it be like to live in Babel in the days after its destruction? We know it is a time of confusion and loss, but it is also a time to reflect, listen, and build. Hey, it's Jonathan Haidt. My critique of this article is that he excludes our own oligarchs, right? That he's got a section here on Russia, a section here on China, but he's completely disinterested in actually commenting on the reality that our own oligarch class wants it to be confused too. And it wants it to be confused. You guys are all about this right now. It wants it to be confused for a very simple reason, which is that the corporate culture is getting exactly what they want, that the society is in the position it is exactly as it is now. This is how they want it, and they don't want to reform it. That the only reforms they would like to see are to further entrench compliance. And if they can't get compliance, they'll accept confusion. All right, guys. Let's take a look. Today's number is...
Here we go for today's number. It's April 15,
Don't know if I've ever seen Dark Matter 2K around here. Good to see you, bud.
10 balls.
10 balls.
Each ball has a number.
Swirl
Numbers
the
1
numbers.
through 10.
My favorite part.
Swirl the numbers.
So what do we got? We got Mock here with a 7, of course. Liganese with an 8. I'm going. Oh, I forgot to pick a number 2.
Number.
I picked 2. I forgot to pick a number for myself. Oh my god.
Today's number is 1.
Did we all miss it? Did we all miss it? We all missed it. Wah, 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 meh. That's all right. You know, you can't win every time, guys. Can't win every time. We had 3 5s. Fantastic. You know what, man? That's how it goes. So at least we lost together, right? At least we lost as a group. You know, it's solidarity. Solidarity. Yeah. To keep talking about that article that I just read. First of all, I like the overall spirit of it, right? That there is a truth to it, that things are becoming more extreme, polarized, right? Jonathan Haidt, of course, is not a economist, right? And so he has no commentary on the material conditions and how that has exacerbated all of this. But what's most troubling to me about an article like that, while I can ostensibly agree with this idea, and I appreciate that there is being research done and that people are talking about the impact of social media, well, I'm glad to see you, Dark Matter. That's nice. That's nice. Glad to hear that people are watching the stream outside of the live, etc., and so on and so forth. Hope you're enjoying yourself, bud. I hope you like my content. Tell everybody I exist. Like, share, subscribe. All the things, bells and whistles. Give me some money. All of this stuff. So a man like Jonathan Haidt, while he's got a lot of good information here, and it's a worthwhile conversation to have. That's why I wanted to read this aloud. But you see how he's ostensibly defending the oligarch class, right? That by focusing on, well, this is what the Russians can do, and this is what the Chinese can do, and this is what the Republicans would do, or this is what the Democrats are doing, right? All of this. Well, that ignores entirely what the actual owners of the society are doing, right? There's literally no commentary on any of this outside of like Facebook and like Twitter basic algorithms, and it's all presented to us as like a oopsie-doo, right? Oopsie-doo, right? There's absolutely no question of what I consider to be just like a firmly entrenched reality, which is that the oligarch class has structured the society the way they want it to be structured. And their largest concern now is how do they maintain power? How do they ensure that the power of the oligarch class remains in the oligarch class? And they can't have conversations that are reasonable or rational, because any reasonable, rational person will begin the very simple conversation of why are these guys in charge in the first place? What is it that grants these people any special authority to be able to manipulate markets, manipulate the stock market, manipulate labor markets, housing markets, manipulate our democracy, right? That Haidt's concern that we are confused and becoming angry at one another is noted, but obviously the oligarch class wants it to be that way. And so if you can't win through rational discourse, the thing to do is to actively confuse the discourse, right? Just if you have what you want and you're the ruler and you're worried that people are going to put together what's going on and actually begin organizing against you, well, then the thing to do is to confuse the discourse, right? Which they've successfully done. And Haidt presents an image that this is all happening kind of on accident. And well, all we need to do is reform this system, right? Which I think some of you were commenting on. Yeah, classic lib. Yeah. And let's read some of your comments, guys, on this. That was quite a long one. It was longer than I expected. I am happy I read that, though. Tower of Babel, when the creation scared the creator shitless. The God in the story of Babel sounds like an anti-communist union buster. Keep in mind that the majority of registered voters in the U.S. are registered as independent. There's just no money in targeting them as they aren't a monolith. Yeah. I don't know if Haidt is... Like, I think he's just kind of a well-meaning boob, more or less. Like, not even a boob, really. I just think that his confirmation... He talks about confirmation bias, right? And so his confirmation bias tells him that he lives in a country that is good, right? That there is a goodness that exists in the American ethos that doesn't. There's no goodness in the American ethos, right? That the American ethos is one of a genocidal nation, like a genocidal slaver nation, and that's what they want to do, and that's what they pursue, right? And because he believes in the innate goodness of America, obviously, well, that's how you believe in things like you can, we just need to reform the system. We just need to reasonably have reasonable discourse and actually reform the system, and then things will improve and get better. And he doesn't really want to face the reality that the way things are there because the owners want them to be that way, and our owners are psychopathic, right? So he's not... He himself is likely not, but he certainly empowers them. And I think would have a difficult time accepting the reality of who the ruling class actually is. And like, this entire article sort of predisposes the idea that America actually has a democracy in the first place, which it doesn't really. It has the image of a democracy. But the whole thing has been purchased, and who has it been purchased by? That's just not even part of the commentary. Yeah, that other side, I hate those guys. The guys that aren't my guys, exactly. A CIA guy should probably lament the loss of a single point of control in the public. Yeah. Wait, is that Jordan Peterson or another Peterson? It's probably not Jordan Peterson because it made sense, right? Like, Peterson rarely writes in a way that's comprehensible. That's why he needs to fall back into, you just didn't understand it all the time. Because he doesn't write in a way that's comprehensible. I knew it was confirmation bias. That's what I thought all along. That's hilarious, Bumbleguppy. I keep missing your screams because YouTube doesn't notify me. YouTube's very spotty. I've learned this about YouTube. It's very spotty. Like, I've subscribed to places and, like, just missed their stuff because YouTube doesn't inform. Like, the system's just very spotty. Like, yesterday's stream didn't do so well, but that's only one stream out of a bunch, so I'm not willing to hit the I've been shadow banned button quite yet. But if it continues that way, maybe I'll start to think about it. But, like, my perception of what YouTube is doing to me is that it's just mainly, like, it's not a perfect system, and the robot's not very good, honestly. That definition of traditional conservative describes liberals as well to me. Yeah, status quo, incremental change, keeping up appearances, same thing. Well, because, yeah, like, they are really. Like, the difference between the liberals and the conservatives, in a very real sense, in our society, is that one is willing to tilt their head and go, I feel bad for you. Like, I'm not going to do anything about it, but, I feel bad for you. Well, whereas the conservative will be like, well, get fucked. Like, deal with it. Right? Get over it. Yeah, moderate equals right-wing fascist. And I noticed that as well. I have better notification on my stream. Yeah, I always start at 6, but, like, again, like, I don't think it's anything nefarious. Like, I think it really is just, like, the system's not really good. Yeah, I have ADHD, yeah. So many words that ultimately say so little. I mean, I think that it's a fair conversation to have, though. Like, what is this social media doing to us? Like, and I was surprised that he didn't include the fact that on Facebook, there's, like, the emojis that you can press. Like, he talked about the like button and the share button, but he didn't talk about the array of emojis that you can press. And there was an article I read fairly recently that if you pressed the angry face, like the frustrated angry face, that Facebook gave that 5 times the weight. So it would spread around 5 times faster. When I found that out, I stopped using Facebook immediately because it's no longer like they're actively spreading hate. That hate gets 5 times the amount. So if you hit something and you say, I hate this, or I'm angry by this, this outrages me or frustrates me, well, Facebook spreads it around 5 times more than they spread other emojis around. That's no way to organize like a model. So it's no longer an accurate reflection of the user base, right? It's been manipulated from the start. And I was surprised that Haidt didn't include that in this article. Yeah, that's a lib for you. No mention of capitalism pouring agent provocateurs into forums during elections. Yeah, correct the record types. Yeah, like that's where these sorts of commentators tend to turn the corner for me. Because like if you're gonna talk about everything is exactly dark matter's hitting it here. Lib paranoia is off the charts. No self-reflection of America's problems. Everything is Russia's fault or social media or now China's fault. To be fair to him, he didn't really spend that much time on that specific point, right? Like both China and Russia, I think, get a paragraph each, and in a fairly long article. But of course, the critique is right in front of us, which is okay. But if you're going to put a paragraph about Russia and a paragraph about China, how about a paragraph about BlackRock? How about a paragraph about the oligarch class in general and how they're benefiting from this confusion, right? No, that's not included. Oh, it's because you think those institutions are actually good. Like, you think that the capitalist structure as it exists is actually good and working for the benefit of the populace when it's explicitly not, right? His opinion is damning. The mob rules of the sweaty masses being responsible for upsetting his precious status quo. Yeah, his flip reference to Occupy Wall Street without the context of concentrated capital and the police destroying it. Yeah, I noticed that too. Yeah. I mean, I do think that his critique of Occupy Wall Street is not inaccurate, though. Like, Occupy Wall Street really didn't fail, or didn't really succeed in articulating an alternative vision. That like, the Occupy Wall Street movement generally was very disorganized at its core, right? It was essentially an anarchist movement because... which, okay, Milo, you're actually going to dump over everything if you pull that wire. Sorry, guys, I got to deal with my dog. Milo, I need you to go like that. Good boy. That'll go like that so that you don't dump over the whole computer. Yeah, that's right. Like, the Occupy Wall Street movement was disorderly, and it was disorderly on purpose, right? They sought disorder, right, in many ways. And also, like, the very fact that the Occupy Wall Street, like, the fact of where it was, right? Zuccotti Park in New York, right? Like they wanted it to be a cultural movement and they didn't really intend or understand how to make it a political movement. Because, like, first and foremost, like, get to the White House, guys. Like, what are you doing? Like, why are you in Zuccotti Park in New York in the first place? Right? But that kind of just shows you how the social consciousness, first of all, is confused, but how it also works. That no one really knows what's going to kick up. No one really knows how things are going to go, right? And the Occupy Wall Street movement, like, it wasn't able to articulate. Certainly there were demands within it, and the language of "we are the 99%," that the 1% and the 99% is powerful language that came into the culture because of the Occupy movement. But I think it is accurate to critique it from the angle that because they refused and defied the concept of any kind of organizational structure whatsoever, it meant that they couldn't really be effective and they couldn't really get anything done, right? And then when the clearing of the parks began, the clearing of the parks were largely successful, right? So I don't think it's inaccurate to critique the Occupy Wall Street movement. There are definitely things to critique about it. And hopefully, if another movement is to occur, like something like the Occupy Wall Street movement needs a vanguard party, right? There needs to be, it's like what Lenin said, right? You need a structure. You need something that is respected and can withstand outside pressure, and also is organizational and can direct these people, right? Like if Occupy Wall Street, this mass of popular energy that took to the streets, which I would love to see again, if they were willing to accept a structure that they could interact with democratically, and then that structure could actually wield the power of their bodies in an effective and powerful way, that's going to be a very strong political movement. But Occupy never got there because people were unwilling to accept it, which I think is probably the largest critique I think you can give the Occupy Wall Street movement is the kind of it was inherently unstable. And there's the lib concept that ordinary people are stupid and just need to be guided by libs to restore sanity. It's so cloying and pointless. The far left are bad and the center is good. I mean, if you believe that the structure of and it's why he can't comment on it, right? And it's a fair centrism is just the position of not taking positions on anything, yeah. And it's fair to critique this article from this perspective that like. If you think that the institutions are largely good, and if you think your society is largely good, right, then you can buy in to these ideas. But the reality is that America has never been good. Like it's been a complete disaster from start to the present day. Like literally a genocidal nation that was built by slaves, right? And we're just not supposed to talk about that. That's just not part of the conversation, right? We can't reform the system as long as engagement to promote money making ad impressions are the foundation for which content is pushed by social media algorithms. Yeah, I mean, I went on Hassan Piker has a Reddit, and I went on there and I just like posted a comment or a thread or whatever, and I just asked like, hey, does Hassan actually organize? Like, are there actual like, is he attempting to like protest and use his people to organize? I was immediately banned, like immediately banned, with like the dumbest comment that I've ever seen any community give me when they banned me. Right? Like I don't remember what it was, but it was just childish, and like. So like YouTube and these online like this platform, they encourage people to stop dissenting, right? And they encourage people like myself to stop communicating in a certain way, right? Like if I post a newsreel and that newsreel has like war or violence on it, my stuff gets demonetized, right? And so in this way, they manipulate the kind of content that, and of course it's not a full manipulation. I can still do it, but I just need to accept that they're going to demonetize that stuff. And so I'm fully incentivized to cease presenting certain information. And recently there was, who was it? There were a couple of people. It was Hinkle and another one. I forget his name. Really goofy guy, if you ask me. But they got banned off Twitch for quote unquote spreading Russian misinformation. And when you actually look at the content, like it's two guys who seem to be struggling and trying to find information and espouse information regarding the Russian-Ukrainian crisis, and they're not willing to accept what they're being told by their own media. And it's a very terrifying moment for someone like me, because like if guys like that are getting banned off of platform, I think it was Twitch they got banned off of, like I can get banned, right? And so this means that if I'm going to be commenting on that kind of stuff, I've got to be very careful. Like I've got to be very, very careful what I say. And I can't be fast and loose. Like I really need source documents. I really need to focus. And I mean, I always try to do that, but I mean, YouTube removed Chris Hedges, right? Who uses more source documents than a guy like Chris Hedges? They just removed his stuff. They removed Lee Camp's stuff, right? They removed Abby Martin's stuff. They removed Oliver Stone's stuff, right? Like, it's very scary for someone like me, who is, and ultimately, like, to bring it back to the original point, like, what YouTube is trying to do is they're trying to funnel people like me into getting people like you to be inert, right? That they don't want me to say to you, you guys got to come to protests. You guys, we got to actually protest. We got to actually, like, come together. Incidentally, if you're in Toronto, we got a protest going on. Let me pull up the information so I'm not just an ass. We have a protest going on April 20th, 931 Yonge Street, 11:30 a.m. So if you are in Toronto, April 20th, 931 Yonge Street, 11:30 a.m., come on down. Right, we're going to do a protest there. And then we've got another rally April 28th at 11 a.m. at Queen's Park. It's and this is all an ending disability poverty, right? It's a rally for ODSP. The first one is with an organization called POOF that's protecting ODSP OW funding. It's by with Isabella Gamp, and this next one is through ODSP directly. And so we have to start protesting. We have to start gathering in force and en masse to fight back against this structural system of abandonment that we're all experiencing. But like people like Hassan Piker, or like people who have like hundreds of thousands of viewers and like 1 million subscribers, they're just not doing it. And it's because they want to buy houses and they want to be comfortable. And so they're going to play by the rules, right? They're going to play by the rules. And the rule is, abide by the corporate power structure. Everyone who doesn't agree with me is a bot, said the wise centrist. Yeah. Lib art of association. Remember, it's lack of free play and not the soul. Yes, this is another good point, Bubblegum. It's the lack of free play and not the soul-crushing capitalist death cult that is causing depression and anxiety. Exactly. Like, just no mention whatsoever of things like climate change. Can't imagine why everybody's depressed and anxious as the place burns down, right? Like, it must be that pesky social media, right? It's got to be those pesky phones. Certainly not the fact that, like, wildfires are spreading faster, flooding is getting worse, right? So there is definitely a distractionary element to it. Long time, oh yeah. Yeah, definitely was channeling my disruptive back-of-the-class personality during that reading. Wanted to shoot spitballs at the author. I mean, again, though, like, the reason why I really wanted to read this is that I do think that I don't want to dismiss someone just because I disagree with them, right? Like, I think that we should. I fundamentally do agree with this point, that it's not good for the discourse to just ban people or cancel people. I think it's a really, really bad thing. A really bad part of what's happened in our society. Without a doubt. Like, I think about, like, I have been every single Canadian subreddit that I visited, I've been banned off of. Because of my position on, well, not even position. Just, like, literally spreading around, like, pretty basic information. From sources like the Ottawa Citizen, for God's sakes. So, like, using Canadian sources to point out things like that we are funding Nazis in Ukraine, right? Like, that it's not insignificant information, right, about this crisis, and I get banned from it, right? Seems like an extremely unhealthy way to run any kind of society, right? Seems like an extremely unhealthy way to be, because we are because we're isolating ourselves into these echo chambers. And I'm trying desperately to break through this. But and the way that I'm breaking through it is by including myself in as much stuff as I can, right? To involve myself in as much cultural stuff as I can. But like, literally, I will go into a place, and I will get banned from that place because I am also subscribed to another place. Like, I don't even make a comment. I don't even say anything. I'm just observing it, and then I'll get a message saying you've been banned from this place because you're subscribed to another place. So literally, the ethos is simply by even participating, simply by even listening to the other side at all, you're being excluded from participation over here. And that's becoming ubiquitous. Like, that's become ubiquitous. And to me, that's extremely dangerous. Like, it's extremely dangerous. And of course, what it means to me is that there's a couple of subreddits that I'm a part of that refuse to ban people for this reason. Like, and I've really tested it. And what it's done is it's actually created a space where there's a lot of robust conversation that actually occurs, right? And of course, you have idiots show up, and you have the jerks that come in and all that kind of stuff, right? Normal shit, normal internet shit. But, like, it does also mean that you can have surprising conversations with people, and you can have, like, you can actually end up in a position where the person that you're ostensibly disagreeing with, you kind of come to a more middle kind of ground. I've seen this happen. I've experienced it. I've been part of it. And it just seems like that's becoming rarer and rarer and rarer, and that it's being built into the culture, and that we should exclude everybody and draw lines. But unlike someone like Jonathan Haidt, I'm not willing to say that it's simply because of, like, technological manipulation or any of that. I think there's a deep economic component to this, that of course everything is becoming heightened, right? Material poverty is real, right? And if you refuse to acknowledge the causes of that poverty, then what you end up with is people who are on the inside of the wealth and people who are on the outside of it, right? And because there's no empathy or understanding going on from this side, for sure, then how do you even communicate, right? We're like literally living in separate universes and separate worlds. Like, in this world, they literally in this world they literally just say things like, just work harder, like just get a better job, right? Because that makes sense given their ethos, right? Given the fact that and what's ironic though is that, like, no one is more mollycoddled than this group of people. Like, they all they've ever done is literally say yes, right? They just say yes to the opportunities that are handed to them, and so they just go, yes sir, and they do what they're told, right? And so of course they ascend and all of this kind of stuff. And you present to them a worldview that says, like, yeah, like, that doesn't work for most people or for anybody. And their only solution is, well, just say yes, sir, and do what you're told, right? Get a job, right? So there's like an like, we're literally in this Tower of Babel moment because we aren't speaking the same language. That's always been my understanding of the Tower of Babel. That it wasn't that it's not like these people started literally talking like Arabic and these people were speaking English. It's that the language itself and like, you had people living at the top of the tower who had never been outside of the tower. And so of course they're just speaking in a different language that has become incomprehensible to huge sections of the populace. And I think that's exactly where we're at now. That the people who have been sheltered their whole lives and have always just said yes sir and done what they're told just don't understand that can't work or doesn't work. Like, it doesn't compute whatsoever, right? And then you throw into the mold the idea that, like, okay, even if you do that and achieve, then you're doing it in a society that's designed to destroy itself through climate change. So it's terrible advice. But as long as you don't acknowledge the existence of climate change, like 30% of the society doesn't, you can believe what you like and you can say what you like. If you want to get published, just be a well-meaning, rude lib. Okay, I get it now. Money, here I come. Yeah, which is why I'm not published. Yeah, like dissenters get thrown out of the system, right? I always wonder, where do they get the idea that the capitalist society and a democratic society, yet the entire system is completely anti-democratic when the government tries to become democratic, then that government is authoritarian. Yeah, exactly. Remember, Peterson has a degree in PhD in theology, which is hilarious to me because he's never actually read the Bible. He certainly doesn't care about Christ. I was thinking of you, Famita, while John read this, as Libs uses argument and sourcing to vomit status quo lib pablum, clicking his tongue to no good conclusion, and you are published. It's angerifying, yeah? I have the bell. I like everything I watch. I don't know why they won't notify me, yeah. Like, share, subscribe. Helps the traction. Yeah, it's true. It's true. Peterson uses all these words as a substitute to sound big and important and thought-provoking. Yeah, I mean, look, my opinion of Jordan Peterson really does boil down to it shows that when there's an intellectual vacuum, when there is a vacuum of actual thinkers and people who actually have something important to say, that vacuum gets filled, right? And it gets filled with people like Jordan Peterson, who, like, exactly as you say, like, they sound thought-provoking and they sound interesting, but they're not really saying much of anything that's important, right? And when you actually do parse what they're saying and you actually do figure it out, it's either banal, right, or terrifying. Look, Peterson's central thesis, like the thing upon which all things rest, the linchpin, is that a single individual and the power of a single individual can overwhelm the power of not only every other individual that exists in the society on the ascension of the meritocracy, right? That's how he views it, right? So that a single individual can overwhelm the power of all other individuals, but overwhelm the power of every individual that's ever existed, as well as the forces of the universe themselves. So Peterson lives in a very fascistic worldview of the mythical creation of the hero, right? And he outright says it, right? Like, author your own fate, right? And it's articulated in other ways, like pull yourself up, right? Stand up straight with your shoulders back, right? Bootstrapping, all of this. But fundamentally, it's this irrational, hysterical, falsifiable completely belief that the energy of a single individual can overwhelm the energy of all other individuals who have ever existed, as well as the forces of the universe itself, right? It's hysterically delusional. And it works because it's a comfortable lie, right? It tells the individual that you can do it. You can ascend. You can reach the mountaintop. Absolutely. But of course it's completely false because only a select tiny few will. And of course that select tiny few, what do they say? I got here because I'm the best. And then when you actually look at their life story, you realize, no, dude, you didn't get here because you're the best. You got here because of a set of circumstances. It's always the case, right? That, sure, you're the guy that, like, took the last jump, but it required your family to be like this and their family to be like this and their family to be like this, and for the confluence of all things to sort of click in a correct way for you to even be where you're at in the first place. And your denial that that's the way it actually is just hysterically delusional, right? Which means outright, like, the last person whose advice you should take is the person who's standing at the very top. And because unless they're saying something like, I got here because I'm lucky, like, it was very fortunate, right? If that's not what they're saying, then you don't need to believe a thing they have to say because they don't know anything about anything. And that's Jordan Peterson, right? He's stupid, he's illiterate, he's delusional, and frankly, he's boring. It's like when you need to reach the word limit on an essay you don't want to write mocked. Yeah, or when you want to sound smart in an essay and use a thesaurus for the first time. M-O-N, that smells moon. Hey, Methane, how you doing, dude? Yeah, the pug demands attention. Absolutely, dude. Left leaders in the U.S. have a habit of dying violently, so anarchy as distributed leadership is pretty viable, at least. Yeah, I mean, there is that, right? Like, I can see why some of the Occupy people didn't want to stand up and be like, I'm a leader, because the CIA would just kill them, right? Like, and of course, that's like what all the cops and the CIA people during the Occupy movement were after. They wanted to know who the leaders were so that they could kill them, right? Pretty straightforward. Yeah, imagine thinking streaming is more helpful than protesting. See, what's interesting about Hassan is that I'm still on the fence about him, because a lot of his takes are really good, right? Like, he seems to have a really strong understanding of communism. He seems to have a really strong understanding of these sorts of things. I can't decide whether or not he's actively grifting people or whether or not he's just comfortable. What's the protest on the 20th about? It's for POOF, protecting ODSP funding. It's to defend disability, to defend people who are on disability, and to highlight, hey, like, we're not giving people on disability enough money. Like, the rent is higher than the amount of money that we give people who are on disability. We give less people. We give less money than the United States does, right? Like, we're actively abandoning disabled people. Like, it's quite serious. Like, it's quite serious. And so this idea that we're just gonna look at the most vulnerable people and just keep fucking abandoning the shit out of them, like, get fucked, get completely fucked. So we protest. And frankly, I find the central organizer, that's Isabella Gamp, I find her to be very inspirational, right? She's a trans woman, right? She's worked her whole life, right? She's got an array of disabilities. She's not wheelchair bound, but she needs a wheelchair if she's going to exist in the society, for sure. And I just admire that she just doesn't take any shit from anybody. Because, like, we are actively structuring this place to abandon people like her. And I'm deeply concerned that, like, the medical assisted dying system is our solution for this. That instead of saying, oh, we're not giving enough to disabled people, we should actually do something about that, so we're going to up that, and you know, or maybe we should actually take a look at, like, rents. Maybe we should actually have a conversation about rents and rent control and all of this, because that seems to be the major concern. So on and so forth, blah, right? No, instead of that, we're just going to erect a system that says, well, you're disabled and suffering, and we're not going to give you enough to live, so here's the death option. I mean, we're a barbarian culture. Like, it seems to be the way it's being structured. So, come. 11 a.m., 931 Yonge Street. Let's go. It depends. If you're a colonized person exhausted by colonization, you have every right to not want to argue with smooth brains that refuse to understand that you are human. I mean, there is that, totally. Like, that's a very, like, Malcolm X style point, right? That, like, Malcolm X's critique of Martin Luther King, which Martin Luther King started to adopt more and more as time went forward, is like, you can't really negotiate with white people. Like, they don't really view you as a person, right? Like, this idea that you're going to integrate the society, like, these people don't think you're a person. How do you have a conversation with somebody like that? It's a very uphill battle. Today I got into an argument with my best friend because I'm being skeptical of the latest claim of the rape accusation in Bucha by Russia. I mean, we should absolutely be skeptical. The Pentagon has said they can't verify any of this stuff, right? Like, nobody can actually verify anything. So it's all just rumors and conjecture, right? That's all it is. And not only is it just rumors and conjecture, it's rumors and conjecture by known liars who have actively lied to us all the time, right? We've got no reason to believe any of that stuff. Right? Like, we have literally no reason to believe anything from any side, incidentally. Like, that's a truism of war, right? Like, and these sorts of stories, like, they're obviously done in order to foment more war fervor and to keep public opinion on the side on the side that you want it to be on, right? Like, if you can't be base skeptical of what known liars have said about the current conflict, like, if you're not allowed to be skeptical about that, then we're done. Like, and if you're refusing to have, like, a basic amount of skepticism towards the people who've lied to you about literally every conflict we've ever had. Like, literally every conflict we've ever had. Like, if you're not willing to be skeptical about those known liars as they talk now, that I don't know what to say to you. Like, I don't know. I don't know what to say to you. Like, we have the right to be skeptical of that kind of stuff, right? And if there's an investigation and it comes out that that occurred in Russia, then we'll take a look at it, right? And have a conversation about it. But until that occurs, it's just another ghost of Kiev as far as I'm concerned. Just like, oh, did you hear there was a fighter jet that shot down 1,000 planes in a single second? Like, okay, if you say so, champ. No, Reddit is clearly compromised and infiltrated. Some of the communities in Mins, the way it's motivated is a witch hunt, inquisition sometimes. Yeah, it seems to be that way. And I mean, it's chasing people like me off the platform, for sure. Like, and I'm going towards other platforms. There's like Hex Bear and there's Lemigrad, right? After the quarantining of Jen Zedong, I was just like, yeah, like what's here? So I go to Reddit now because it is still a good news aggregate. But and when they ban you from subreddits, you can still look at what they're doing, right? You just can't comment anymore. And he doesn't get how Western sources lies, and it doesn't matter if there's a multiple article reporting on a certain target. Yeah, well, that just makes him a simp. It's as simple as that, right? And you should call him that. Right? He's just a simp for the capitalist oligarchs, right? If he's not gonna be skeptical, and he's just gonna swallow what's being told to him, right? And he's not gonna try and find like third-party verification, or he's not gonna be interested in the idea that there's contrary information or anything, right? Like, he's just a simp. That's all. That yes, oligarch daddy. Yep, my oligarch daddy said it was true, so daddy said it was true, so that's right. That's all. You don't need to take that seriously. I mean, you need to take it seriously because your friend's a simp, but we don't want to be poor, and it's hard to trust anyone because we have been bombarded with bad faith shit. Yeah, we perceive betrayal. Yeah, that's absolutely the truth, Compton. Like, that's why it's so difficult for the left to organize, if you ask me, because we're constantly in this, like, where's the betrayal? Where's the dagger? We're constantly looking for that. Arabic, not Arabic. Arabic, Arabic. Did I say Arabic? Probably. Arabic. Arabic. Doing it. Most languages develop and spread naturally. There are some exceptions, like Esperanto or Valapuk. Amazing. Never heard of Valapuk before. I learned something here every day. Well, that's if that happens, Bumble, then we're winning. We're all winning. I enjoy the idea of Esperanto, but spoken language don't interest me too much. I know two. I'm good. Oh, you know two? What's the second one? Tell us how you really feel about Peterson. I mean, look, if I actually quite like Peterson as a person. Like, if you want my genuine opinion of Jordan Peterson, is that I just think he's like kind of a good old boy who got too big for his britches. That, like, fundamentally you read a book like The 12 Rules of Life and you're just like, oh, this is just like a kick in the pants. Stand up straight, like, get out there, fight the good fight, you can do it, right? Try to be kind, right? Like, do your best, but you gotta try, right? Only you can do it, right? And I read it and I was like, oh yeah, okay. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And because he's a rural man, like, he's a rural Albertan guy, he was raised by ranchers, right? And I'm like rural Manitoban guy, right? So I feel like the language that he speaks, I kind of understood just because we have a similar background, right? And that, like, if I had been born in the same generation as Peterson, I could see myself kind of ascending to where he is, because when he was going to university was cheap, right? And there wasn't actually that much competition. And so he was able to continue ascending and do so kind of freely, right? Whereas when I was going to university, it was not cheap at all. It was very expensive. There was a massive amount of competition. And I kind of lost the thread of it. I kind of got to be like, this seems all very pointless and dumb, frankly. But so all of that said, right, if all you did was read 12 Rules for Life, you'd be like, oh yeah, okay, great. Where Peterson becomes more controversial is that he thinks that he is smart enough or well-read enough or interesting enough to comment on things that are outside of that purview, and he isn't. Just simply, like, he doesn't know how to stay in his lane. John, did you know if you're on ODSP and get married, you don't qualify for it anymore? Yep, I did know that. It's brutal. Maybe Hassan is like a lawyer. Some people can argue any side well and have that charisma and talent make people believe them. Doesn't mean they mean what they say. Well, and ultimately, I just take a look at a guy with Hassan. Look, grifter or not, right? He's irrelevant in the end of it all, right? Like that he doesn't organize people. He's not trying to move people forward, right? He's funneling people at best into just dead-end political parties like the Democratic Party, right? So he's just like not, he doesn't really matter that much at the end of the day, right? Because it's like, so what? Like, so what if he says what he says and teaches and does all that kind of stuff? It all funnels into a dead end, right? U.S. approving MAD is basically the equivalent of suicide booths, yeah. You know what I find funny? In the first episode of Futurama, came out way before 2008. Since we were introduced to the booth, it says since 2008. Yeah. Want to hear the quicker of why I was #1 skeptical in the article? Showed me, yeah, Radio Free Europe, are you kidding me? Like, that's basically just straight up CIA. Like, anything that says Radio Free, you're immediately like, so it's the CIA. I think the Reddit changes are not ideological per se, but in my opinion, are simply the result of Madison Avenue Focus Group making the IPO marketability to well-to-do libs more attractive. Yeah. Napping. Capitalism and liberalism because lobster, yeah. I like to think that, but I imagine the truth might be closer. The grand plan is too big, and I don't have enough information to see or understand it, or it could be too evil. Honestly, Methane, I think that like it seems. I recommend everybody go listen to some interviews by Jack Dorsey, former CEO of Twitter, and like even when he goes on Joe Rogan's podcast, like these guys don't know what they're doing, and I'm not saying that to be like they're idiots or they're stupid. Like I'm saying that the project that they have undertaken is bigger than their capability to control it. That they have created a monster, and they don't know what they're doing with it, right? Like, I think that someone like Zuckerberg is evil, right? Like his story of betrayal and monopolization and many of the things that he has done as a CEO are duplicitous on the face of it. But someone like Jack Dorsey, like Jack Dorsey is about as straight edge as it can come, I think. That he just kind of was where he was when he got involved with Twitter, and like I just think that they like I think the problem is that there isn't a plan. I think that's the problem, right? Is that at no point did any of these guys actually sit down and say, we should probably talk about this, and we should probably think about what this is doing, and we should probably have a better idea. But no, what's the ethos, right? The market will decide. Free market, right? Like, don't have a plan. And I'm always trying to pull people away from this idea that there's some kind of large-scale Machiavellian plan. Look, if there was a large-scale Machiavellian plan happening in this society right now, things would be better, even if the plan was evil, right? Like, I'll say this again so that we really, really fucking understand it. Even if the people making the plan were evil, the society would still be better, because at least there would still be a plan. That the problem is that there is no plan. That everything is just free market capitalism, the government is bad, no centralized authority, no centralized idea of what's going on, right? Don't actually talk about what things are going to do in the society. Don't act like literally these tech guys are literally just like are are literally just creating technology and then just throwing it into the society and walking away from it, right? And whoa, got a little pug, pug. It's the pug time. It's a pug time. Pug time. And so the trouble is that there is no plan. That's the trouble, right? And yeah, but this is exactly what I'm talking about, right? You caught one interview with Dorsey when he stepped down or whatever. It was interesting. Don't have many good thoughts on it, but he seemed okay. That's exactly right. That like Dorsey is just a dude who's trying his best. That's all, right? He doesn't really have any big plans. He doesn't really know what's happening with Twitter. He doesn't really know what to do with it, right? And more what happens in these structures where there's like these big monstrous technologies and these big crazy things, well, along comes a grifter, right? Like somebody like Elon Musk, right, who gets involved with Twitter. Like what Elon Musk did with Twitter was hilarious, right? So he buys up like 9% of Twitter, right? Starts talking about how I'm gonna buy up a bunch of Twitter, right? I'm gonna own Twitter, right? And well, what does this do? Well, the price of Twitter starts to skyrocket because everyone's like, oh, let's get in on it, all that kind of stuff. And then what does Elon Musk do? He turns around, sells his stocks. So he runs a grift on everybody, right? Gets like something like $50 billion for free, right? For doing nothing. Sure, you need to be careful when making that argument because a lot of people feign ignorance to get away with shit. Oh yeah, for sure. For sure. But my statement to that is, look, if you are like the CEO of like an international corporation that we're allowing to operate, right? You don't get to call ignorance. Like you don't. You're responsible for this shit. Yeah, Musk runs pump and dump scams all the time. Exactly, right? And the Elon simps love him for it. It's the exact system capitalists want to spend $9. Yeah, that's right. That's right. And to tie it into the article that we just read here, the chaos is the point. The chaos is the point. That if you can't win the ideological battle, and these neoliberals can't, right? They can't win an actual ideological conversation, an ideological battle. It's not possible, right? So what's left, right? Confusion. And that's what you do. Just confuse the discourse. Musk is funny. He doesn't fool me. I saw a potential trap, but it's hard to tell what's going on in his head. If you ask me, dude, I think what we're seeing with Elon Musk is just like a rich kid with daddy issues. I really think that's all it is. It's not anything bigger than that. Like, his dad was an apartheid emerald mine owner, right? Like a literal slaver. It's not difficult to understand that probably that guy didn't give Elon a lot of hugs and shit, right? Like, so Elon Musk Elon's always in this gotta please daddy, right? And of course, everything Musk gets is from his dad, right? It's not hard to perceive this. And so the question I always had about someone like Elon Musk is like, why is he always trying to convince us that he's smart? He's always trying to convince us that he's like this super smart genius guy, right? And some people have tried to chalk that up to him creating a brand for himself so he can sell himself to get more money, like in that way, and that it's a clever sort of business decision. But I think it's deeper than that. I think that he's perpetually on the path of trying to impress his daddy, so that like once I step onto Mars, then daddy has to say that he's proud of me, right? And he's always just trying to impress someone who will never be impressed, right? Someone who will never think that Elon is enough, because the type of person that his father was, like, he was a slaver, right? It's very unlikely that he was ever going to look at his son and be like, I'm proud of you. Like, any of that kind of stuff. And then also, I think that this is part of it too. He's got so much money so that these sorts of things have no real world consequences to him. It's just a funny thing that he can do, right? That's all. We were able to put things in words we were already thinking, but at the end of it, through the study of theory, we were able to understand. I think the only arguably good thing Elon ever did was to make electric cars sexy instead of boring liberal tin cans. A marketer should have done that years ago. I mean, the industry was doing everything it could to destroy electric cars. So, like, who was going to fund this enterprise, right? And the existence of Tesla, like, it was necessary that something like Tesla was going to have to exist because we have to transition away from fossil fuels. Like, everybody knows it. But, like, trying to maintain the car culture is going to be very destructive, right? Just maintaining this idea that, like, everybody should have a car. But again, like, there's no plan, right? Like, there's no plan. It's just sell products, sell a better product, right? Life is better if we sell products. Just find a better product. What's the next product? Right? No sense of, like, hey, maybe we should not have products. Maybe we should do something as a people, even if that something is nothing, right? Maybe we should. Who's going to turn into another Vosh? Uh-oh. Who's turning into another Vosh? I mean, Vosh is just like the only reason that guy has any power or influence whatsoever is because he has been doing it since the very start. So he's just been around, and that's all. Like, when you actually, like, observe his views, he doesn't really know anything. Okay, you don't need to come up. Anyway, don't want to turn this into a Vosh conversation because I don't really care. CIA director airs concern that Putin might turn to nuclear weapons. This is such a hysterical, like, it's not what he says, first of all. I mean, yeah, dude, like, there's a lot of interesting stuff surrounding Vosh in regards to his, like, his pedophilia. There's a lot of the pedophilia stuff surrounding Vosh. We've got, like, screenshots of some of the comments that he's made on threads and things. Like, his treatment of women is very suspect. Like, I'm just like, and at the end of the day, like, Vosh has the exact same problem that someone like Hassan has, which is that he's funneling people into a dead end. Like, only on the West can you give someone weapons and it not count as aiding. Yeah, there you go. This is interesting, though, because William J. Burns, the current head of the head director of the CIA, had a document leaked that he wrote when he was the ambassador to Russia. You can find it on WikiLeaks. It's called Nyet Means Nyet. N-Y-E-T, Nyet means Nyet. Where he outright said, like, the actions that we are pursuing in Russia, in Ukraine rather, are going to lead to a war with Russia, right? And this is the then ambassador to Russia, who is now currently the head director of the CIA. And what's interesting about so something like this, right? The director who served as the ambassador to Russia, right, said the potential detonation of such a weapon, a nuclear bomb, even a warning shot, was a possibility that the United States remains very concerned about. But he quickly cautioned that so far, despite Mr. Putin's frequent invocation of nuclear threats, he's seen no practical evidence of the kinds of military deployments or movements of weapons that would suggest such a move was imminent. So here we have a pretty clear-cut case of a CIA director, which they do this all the time, creating a headline, right? CIA director airs concern that Putin might turn to nuclear weapons. When you actually read the article, we don't have any practical evidence of this. We don't have anything real going on with this, right? but I'm going to make a headline anyway. She is afraid that my best friend would turn to another Vosh. But I know my friend, he's a little, hard head. Best example is like a Jimmy Dore. Yeah, that's not a bad place to be. Jimmy Dore's a good guy. Like, Dore's on the right side. Dore's on the right side. Like, I think he and I would have some disagreements or opposing views on things like COVID and the COVID response. But Jimmy Dore's perspective on Jimmy Dore's perspective on the Ukraine war has been spot on. Like, he's been spot on the whole time, right? Like, he's calling it for what it is. He calls a Nazi, right? I think it's fair to say that if the police can arm themselves and the working class should be able to defend themselves, especially considering police on Turtle Island to be even more terrible than they already are. Like, oof. Oh, this is an article. I'm not going to read this article. This is a very technical article. Anytime I know this is absolutely the truth. Well, anytime I read an article like this on the stream, I can feel people's just eyes rolling back into their heads, just being like, "Why are we talking about divergent price movements, inflation as a class struggle?" Let's see what they say about this, though. Despite the Bank of Canada admitting that raising interest rates now have little to no impact on our largely supply-induced inflation, it's nevertheless justifying its course of action by claiming that hiking rates will dampen inflation expectations. The latter theory holds that if central banks don't act, inflation will become entrenched, as both firms and workers seek anticipatory price and wage increases. Yeah, I mean, that's it in a nutshell. Bay Street economists and central bankers are guarding against the dreaded wage price spiral, wherein workers may make wage demands. Anyway, blah, 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 blah. Like, there's so much bullshit in this conversation, right? That, corporations are using, inflation as the excuse to price gouge. And in the same way, the central bank is using inflation as an excuse to raise rates and wipe out competition for their owners, right? Like, once they raise the rate, right? Once they raise the rate, it's going to wipe out a bunch of people, right? And who do you think is going to pick up that capital, right? The owners. So everything you're seeing being done is being done on behalf of the ownership class, right? But they're not going to raise the rates on it. Like, the most effective way to deflate the economy, to stop this inflation, if you actually cared about it, would be to tax wealth away. Very simple. Just find the dead capital and tax it away, right? That would re-stabilize the economy. That's how it would work. But that's not what they're doing. They're using inflation, the problem they themselves created, for an excuse to do all kinds of things that exclusively benefit the ownership class, right? Like, you're going to wipe out a bunch of small fish, so the big fish will gobble it all up. Meanwhile, the big fish are able to gouge the public, saying, "Oh, we got to raise prices. It's inflation," right? I don't know what my position on guns are, to be honest. I mean, I'm a rural Manitoba boy. I'll leave it there. 3 NATO actions leading to war with Russia and Ukraine, as pointed out by CIA Director Kissinger wrote a similar piece. Yeah. In Washington Post about 6 to 8 years ago. Yeah. And I feel like when it comes to this conversation, I've got to fall back on these guys. I think it's the only way I'm going to avoid being banned, is to just say, hey, my position aligns cleanly with the then Russian ambassador, the current head of the CIA. Dora is pushing COVID as like a cold now. Yeah, this is kind of what I'm talking about. I think there's so much confusion regarding COVID. So much. It's so difficult to have a position or an opinion or any of that kind of stuff. And so some people are taking strong positions. And I think really the disagreement that I would have with Dor on this is that we shouldn't have strong opinions. We really shouldn't. On the issue of COVID, on this sort of thing, I just don't think we should have strong opinions. But he has a strong opinion, so what are you going to do? The reality is that when it comes to foreign politics, right? When it comes to foreign politics, he's right, right? And so I'm not going to reject someone just because I'm having a disagreement with them. And ultimately, like, I think that, like, Dor hasn't really crossed any lines for me, you know? Dor is about the money, in my opinion. He's realizing that constant engagement is more effective if you pander to reactionary rhetoric. I mean, that could also be part of it. We don't know. Like, we don't really know. Like, is he just chasing the money? Right? Like, we don't... And that's the other... Like, with Hassan, like, we don't really know. Like, we're not really aware. Like, is Hassan just chasing the money? Certainly that's an incentive, right? Certainly that's part of the incentive structure of things like YouTube. And, like, it's something that I'm always trying to... Like, I'm always going to tell the truth. That the truth as I see it. And it's probably going to mean that I'm always going to be like a low-tier content creator, right? Because I'm always just going to tell the truth. And if people come in and they disagree with me, well, then they're going to leave. Because that's the way it works now, right? Like, if you're not willing to say, yes, sir, whatever you say, sir, right? Well, then you get canceled. And what's that mean? It means they don't engage with you anymore. So they go off into their, little bubble. Whereas I'm just trying to tell the truth as I see it. Yeah, as long as you aren't completely deranged, guns are important and useful tool to have. Have fun hunting a moose with your hands. Wouldn't that be... If you killed a moose with your hands, I don't even know. I don't even know what I say. Yeah. This one's from a fellow by the name of Taylor C. Noakes. Right? Who's Taylor C. Noakes? What a dumb picture. Is an independent journalist and public historian. Dude, you're like publishing articles on the CBC. Like, close your fucking mouth. Like, I'm sorry, dude. Like, for real. Like, this guy's trying to convince us that we should take his opinion seriously, and he's like fucking... Like, okay. I forgive you, Taylor. I forgive you. The thing I find so annoying with Jimmy Dore is that he keeps saying he's a dumb... I think you mean dumb guy, like Joe Rogan. In my defense, methane, I've lived in Toronto my whole life and never hunted. Yeah. I have an uncle who bow hunted moose. I have his bow now. That's pretty fucking wild, dude. But I find this conversation to be kind of cynical, I think is the way that I'm... Like, I'm not that cynical when it comes to these guys. Like a guy like Jimmy Dore, he says that kind of stuff. First of all, he says, he says it because he's always trying to piss on the mainstream media, right? So, or the legacy media or the corporate media or whatever. And so he says that kind of stuff to be like, yeah, a dumb pot-smoking comedian like me can see it, right? And these guys can't? Get out of here, right? And that's kind of his brand, It's who he is. Because it is kind of who he is, right? And he's not bullshitting anybody. And but I do think, and I think Joe Rogan does it for a very similar reason. So he's always got this kind of fallback position. Guys, it is absolutely fucking crazy. Really, when you pause and really when you think about it, it is absolutely batshit crazy go nuts that a guy like Joe Rogan is at the top of the food chain. If anything should tell you that the media system has collapsed completely to the ground, it is that Joe Rogan is at the top of this food chain. There's literally no reason that should be the case. Joe Rogan should be just like a talk show radio. Well, that's exactly what he is. He's like a talk show radio guy who's kind of off on the side, right? All this kind of stuff. And the only reason why he's as popular as he is, and the only reason why people trust him as much as they do, is because the rest of the media system has completely failed. Completely failed. like Joe Rogan is not like, what is this guy, right? Like he's certainly he's a good guy, a hard worker, a comedian, an MMA commentator, right? Like did Fear Factor, right? Does all this kind of stuff. Like he just talks to who he feels is interesting to talk to, and just doesn't, and that's it, right? Like that's it. So like the very fact that he's willing to have conversations with like kind of oddball people and strange people, I think is the attraction. And what does that tell you? Tells you that the fucking media has completely failed, right? Like completely failed. Because the media is not willing to have controversial, interesting figures on and just talk to them, right? That the media is obviously always trying to push an agenda, right? It's always obviously trying to push an agenda. Whereas Rogan's not really pushing an agenda. Like, he has opinions on things, obviously, and I think my biggest critique of Rogan is his hypocrisy regarding the trans rights issues. Like, here's a guy who's always saying that we should always have conversations from all sides, and he takes a strong anti-trans position and then doesn't talk to trans people. Like, pretty straightforward what's going on there, if you ask me. But like, this sort of just flows into everything we know about this guy, which is just like, he's just a bro. Like, he's just a dude. And the only reason he's as popular as he is because the media system has completely failed. And why is it completely failed? Because we don't trust it anymore. Why don't we trust it anymore? Because it's obviously pushing an agenda, right? And what we are hungry for now is for people who are just trying to find the truth, right? Which is kind of what I'm banking on with this channel, by the way, right? That's what I try to do. I'm always just trying to find the truth. What's the truth of the situation? What are the like, I want to know the sides. I want to see who is what and what is who and who's going on, right? And I do think that Rogan attempts to do that too. At least he did it first. I have different opinions now that he's moved to Texas and he did that $100 million deal with Spotify. I have different opinions of Joe Rogan now. But when he was first starting out, and he was just like, not even first starting out, but like when he was in Los Angeles and he was just like doing it from there, like he, I think that he was genuinely just interested in what's the truth, and I'm going to talk to anybody. I'm going to talk to everybody. Well, what do you have to say? Who do you have to say? What do you have to say? And there was no controversy there, and it was clear that he didn't have an agenda. And I think people are just hungry for that. They're just hungry for like, okay, here's a person, here's their perspective, this is what they're saying, okay, like this is the truth. And yeah. I don't know why I got talking about Rogan so much. I hope to end up on Joe Rogan's show one day. Wouldn't that be nice? Be crazy. Be crazy if I did. Adam, good to see you, bud. What are you guys talking about, bro? Like, you guys suddenly talking about 3D printers? I also think 3D printing is mini production line. Mainstream media for so long, like that CIA guy in the article, had a captive audience that they could dictate what people saw and believed. Now people can go somewhere else. Surprised they do. Well, but I think it's even deeper than that, Bumble, which is that, like, people can go somewhere else, but like, if you actually had like a media that was attempting to find out what the truth was, people wouldn't, right? Like, that if the very fact that there isn't a show or wasn't a show like Joe Rogan's show in the mainstream media in the first place is a bit shocking, right? Literally, the whole format is sit down, talk to someone for a period of time. That's the entire fucking show, right? And people are eating it up. People love it. People are it's huge amount. Like, he gets 11 million views. Like, it's enormous what he's doing, right? And what, you're telling me that the $1 billion like gigantic, monolithic, multi-billion-dollar industry, like they couldn't figure out, sit down and just have a chat? Well, and there's a reason why they don't do that. And they don't do that because the media in our culture is not interested in the truth. They're not interested in the truth. They're interested in confusing the truth. They're interested in making it difficult for people to find out what's the truth. Just take a look at what's going on in the climate change conversation, for God's sakes. Where like climate change activists are going on shows and being dismissed by these mainstream media outlets. Like what the fuck do you think is happening? So these people work on behalf of an oligarch class in order to maintain the oligarchy. And if you stand up and say, hey, we're dominated by an oligarchy, we should maybe talk about that and do something about that. Well, what? You just don't get talked to. And so then here's a guy, Joe Rogan, who's just like, well, I'll talk to that guy. Let's talk about that. Right? And even if you think he's stupid or wrong, at least he gets a platform to talk from. Check out Barrett Brown regarding Rogan. Claims he was backed by Thiel, which led to the rise of alt-right guys like Andy, Tim Pool, Jordan Peterson. No, I wouldn't. I would believe that. Like, I don't need to do too much deep digging. Like, I think that like, for God's sakes, like Rogan was in that dark web thing for a while. There was like the dark web of intellectuals where there was like Rogan and Harris, and there was a couple other people who were in on that. Like, yeah, like Rogan's like, he plays the game too. Like, he's not like he's not just a dude, right? Like he's obviously got connections. Like, the fact that he was the host of Fear Factor, like, he's obviously talking to people. Like, there's obviously this kind of stuff going on. And yeah, like, I definitely think that there's more of a behind the scenes than we like to think, but I don't think that Rogan himself is particularly nefarious in this. Like, I do think, like, if it were to suddenly come out that Rogan was actually, like, a CIA asset the whole fucking time, that he was, like, planted by the CIA and their plan was to use Joe Rogan in order to captivate the nation with his podcast, and like that the entire time he was completely in bed with the CIA and was constantly trying to push CIA talking points and all that kind of stuff, I would be blown away. I would be absolutely floored to the ground. I would be like, Joe Rogan is the greatest actor who has ever lived, period. That there is just like an amazing degree of planning and coordination that would have to go into this. And don't get me wrong, like, I think Rogan is kind of pro CIA. Like, he keeps having CIA guys on his show, right? And so it's like he's kind of pro CIA. But yeah, I'm not surprised. I wouldn't be surprised to find out that he was like in the same category of people who helped back people like Andy No, Tim Pool and Jordan Peterson. That wouldn't surprise me at all, right? Because that's kind of what he always has been doing, right? Like, for God's sakes, he kept platforming Harris until everybody realized that, or everybody came to the recognition that Harris was an enormous racist. Like, literally just read his book. Like, some of the most cartoonishly racist shit I've ever seen written about any racial group comes out of the writing of Sam Harris. Like, just cartoonishly racist. You guys are loving the 3D, self-replicating 3D printer. It's common to buy one and then make yourself more. All you really need is a bed plate, stepper motors. I just don't know what I would do with a fucking, like, what would I do with a 3D printer? Probably just dumb shit. You know? I'd probably just do dumb shit with it. Like, everybody would be like, wow, you could use a 3D printer to, like, create tools and, like, create, like, a whole thing. You could, like, build a house out of 3D printer. You could, like, make a car. Like, I'd probably just make stupid sculptures. Like, probably just, like, dumb, like, cartoon character shit. Like, that, like, literally. Like, I would just do dumb art shit. That would be me to a T. I would just do dumb art shit. That's 100% what I would do. I would, like, make models of stuff on, like, Unreal Engine 5 and then take the file and print it in 3D, and it would just be, like, some dumb Like, who gives a fuck about this at all? That's 100% what I would do. Because, I don't know. I think that I think the world is boring. And it would be great to have a machine that could spit out things that would make the world more interesting. And I think this is what attracts people to like anime and all this kind of stuff, is that our world is boring. Like it's super boring. And we could make it so much cooler. Like there could be so much more cool shit in our society and in our world. Like we literally could just create institutions and we could call it like a cool shit generator. And that institution is just responsible for spitting out cool shit all the time. That's its only task, right? And like we're constantly creating ways for us to escape this reality. Like let me be extremely clear about what I'm talking about. Like I'm not talking about like film, television, or video games, or even books, right? I view all of that as portals into other worlds, right? And those worlds might be cool, right? Might be rad to spend some time in those worlds, right? Interesting to spend some time in there, right? To step through a portal, whether it's through your imagination or just visually, into another world of creation. I'm talking about our world. Our world is incredibly banal and incredibly boring. This place could be so much fucking better. So much fucking better. And like in real obvious straightforward ways, right? Like just like it could be way more colorful. There could be art everywhere. Get rid of these fucking dumbass screens in Times Square. Let people see the architecture that they're looking at, right? Like everything is just big stone glass bullshit right now, and it's just like tedious and boring to walk around. Everything's stupid, and the society is boring. Like there's just no life or color, and it's boring because we want it to be that way, because we've ceded to market forces to say let the market decide. And you know what the market said? Oh, this place is boring, so let's create other worlds so that you don't need to engage with this world anymore. That's the solution. And so what is that doing? It's isolating all of us, right? We're all in our little corners, reading our books and playing video games and like doing all that kind of stuff, not interacting with one another, right? Not figuring anything out, not living in our world, not creating communities, not doing anything, not investing anything in this reality, because frankly, this reality sucks. And nobody is incentivized at all to improve it. Because we don't really want to. Yeah, I think that's right. Howard Stern. You're talking about Howard Stern? Like, Howard Stern, I think you're right. Like, he did pave the way for Joe Rogan. And that type of radio shock jock has somewhat always existed, right? And has always taken different forms. Oh, I know, buddy. I know. Can you guys hear this? Cute little guy. Like people have always gravitated towards these kinds of figures who are willing to talk to anybody and have interesting conversations. And the question I've always had, like, okay, well, why don't you do it, you stupid fuck? Why doesn't MSNBC do this? Like, why isn't there an MSNBC podcast where they just have these unfiltered conversations with people? And it's because MSNBC is owned by a corporation that wants to maintain corporate culture. And so if they actually interview people who are actually like, corporate culture is dumb and stupid, and they won't platform them. And so that it's like self-defeating. And we have some kind of device where you could melt down metals. You could technically print the motors yourself. Just gotta anneal, bake at high temperatures. Oh my god. You're like forging shit, dude. Like you're so much farther ahead than I am on this stuff. Generation Why Me? Lots of new people in the chat today, man. Lots of new people in the chat. Good to see you, bud. They're printing whole ass ears with 3D printers now? That's wild. That's wild, man. Dude. Let's... You know what, man? Oh, that's how you spell that. YouTube. Let's... 3D printer. Hold on, filter. I gotta go to the Creative Commons. This
Hey guys,
this guy's gonna print a 3D boat. Hold on. Hold on. This is what I care about. I don't care about what this guy has to say. I just want to see it. I would 3D print grain if I could. Yeah, wouldn't that's an interesting idea. Well, I just don't know what the rules are. Like, I don't know what's possible. Biohacking. You mean eugenics? That's what I hear. When you say biohacking, I hear eugenics. Big glass buildings, just modern pyramids. Yeah, I remember reading a tiny bit about the CRISPR and biohacking. Very interesting, scary stuff. Did you ever see the movie Face in the Crowd? Watch Face in the Crowd. Okay. I'm getting two people saying things. Okay, hold on. Google Ascendance Bio. Here we go. Come on. Ascendance Bio. Is this it? Did I do it? Am I American businessman and life extension activist. I already hate him. I think life extension is stupid. People should die. He sought to develop gene therapies to make inexpensive treatments. You think ghosts are liberal? I am so real. You can make treatments accessible to all working class people with biohacking. I mean, that's not what they'll do, of course. He was found dead in a sensory deprivation isolation tank. Yeah, float spa. So it looks like he took some drugs, passed out, and drowned. With ketamine. There you go. Good start. Dude, I am completely against, like, full hard stop. Like, I'm completely against these life extensionist people. Like, that it's very much just like humans putting themselves on this path of seeking immortality, right? It's always the seeking immortality, and I really am like the people who are attempting to do this, right? They're gonna end up like liches, right? They're gonna end up like ghouls, basically. Which is why biohacking is important. It's open source, available to everyone. Bread Bunny, good to see you. Good to see you. I mean, will it be? Like, will biohacking be open source and available to everyone? Right? Like, I mean, that's a nice idea. But as we have learned about capitalists and capitalism throughout history, if they can't meter it, or if they can't wedge themselves in between the populace and the product, then it doesn't happen, right? That's the long history of capitalism. That if something is free source, open source, everybody can have access to it freely, it simply doesn't happen. So, who is this? What's this? As a programmer, medical investigation. I don't know anything about this guy. Facebook removed his company's products. YouTube removed his live streams. YouTube removed a Reason Magazine video. Oh, okay. That is. Oh, he's okay. So we got a controversial figure here. So he spent 2 years as a researcher where he worked on a Martian colony habitat design. Oh, good. While at the agency, he also He spent 2 years as a researcher at the Mountain View, California's NASA Ames Space Synthetic Biology Research Center, where he worked on Martian colony habitat design. While at the agency, Zahner also analyzed speech patterns in online chat, Twitter, and books, found that language in Twitter and online chat is closer to how people talk than how they write. Interesting. Zehner found NASA's scientific work less innovative than he expected, and upon leaving in 2006, he launched a crowdfunding campaign to provide CRISPR kits to let the general public experiment with editing bacterial DNA. He also continued his grad school business, the Odin, which sells kits to let the general public experiment at home. The company's main advisor is George Church, professor of genetics at Harvard Medical School and director of personalgenomes.org. As of May 2016, the Odin had 4 employees and operated out of Zehner's garage. He refers to himself as a biohacker, believes in the importance of letting the general public participate in scientific experimentation rather than leaving it segregated to the labs. Zehner found the academic biohacking community to be exclusive and hierarchical, particularly with respect to the types of people who decide what is safe. He hopes that his projects can let even more people experiment in their homes. Other scientists have responded that biohacking is inherently exclusive for its dependence on leisure time and money, and that deviance from general safety rules could lead to even harsher regulations for all. Zehner's public CRISPR kit campaign coincided with wider public scrutiny over genetic modification. Zehner maintained that these fears were based on misunderstandings of the product, as genetic experiments on yeast and bacteria cannot produce a viral epidemic. In April 2015, Zehner ran a hoax on Craigslist to raise awareness about the future potential of forgery and forensic genetic testing. Zehner later used CRISPR to attempt to edit his own genes, and is the first known person to do so. Dude, this is like reading like a supervillain. Like this is like some supervillainy shit right here. Come on, straight up. Like, this sounds exactly like the opening or the backstory of like a supervillain, right? Like, come on. Or a superhero, perhaps, maybe to you. His CRISPR kit was displayed at the Cooper Hewitt's 2019 Nature Design Triennial. In February 2016, he attempted a full-body microbiome transplant on himself, including a fecal transplant to experiment with microbiome engineering. So here's the thing. Here's where he gets his powers, right? To see if he could treat his gastrointestinal and other health issues. The microbiome from the donor's feces successfully transplanted in Zehner's gut, according to DNA sequencing done on samples. This experiment was documented by filmmakers Kate McLean and Mario Furlani, and turned into the short documentary film Gut Hack. This is fascinating. It is. In December 2016, Zehner created a fluorescent beer by engineering yeast to contain the green fluorescent protein from jellyfish. Zehner's company, the Odin, released kits to allow people to create their own engineered fluorescent yeast, which was met with some controversy, certainly, as the FDA declared that the green fluorescent protein can be seen as a color additive. Zehner views the kit as a way that an individual can use genetic engineering to create new things in their everyday life. In 2019, Zehner launched a curriculum, Bioengineering 101, featuring a series of educational videos directed at those studying biotechnology for the first time. Zehner was featured in Unnatural Selection, a TV documentary series that presents an overview of genetic engineering, which was released on Netflix in October 2019. In 2020, Zehner, David Aishi, and Daria Dantseva, who formed the group of biohackers named the Central Dogma Collective, tested a DNA-based coronavirus vaccine on themselves and live-streamed the whole process, and made all protocols and data open source and freely available to the public. The DNA vaccine expressed the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein once inside human cells to elicit an immune response. They measured IgC and IgM spike protein antibody response and antibody neutralization of spike protein RBD domain binding to the ACE2 receptor. All 3 individuals had an immune response and neutralization response to the vaccine. Guys. No, look, things like this are like anything, okay? It's not that stuff like this is going to go into really crazy places, right? It's going to go into really crazy places because of some sort of like Machiavellian evil sort of a thing, right? It's never the case that that's kind of the way. Well, I shouldn't say never, but like it's typically the case that just wacky, dangerous, crazy shit happens because humans are wacky and dangerous. Like that's it. Like that's it. That like when it comes to this kind of stuff, I take a very skeptical eye, right? I have a very like leering kind of eye at it. And I definitely look at it with like, yes, absolutely there's going to be like things that occur and come out of this that are going to make people go like, oh wow, isn't that interesting? Oh wow, that's cool. Oh wow, this is the kind of thing. Oh my goodness, yeah. Oh wow, right? There's going to be a lot of intrigue and all of this, but there's also going to be like really fucked up shit. Like there's also going to be really fucked up shit. And how do I know? Because humans are involved, right? Like, should we actually unlock the ability to hack our own genes? Do we think this is wise? Like, it's cool, right? And from like an intellectual pursuit, it's interesting for sure. Like, and there is stuff like that, but do we think it's wise? And I feel like we should probably be having a wider conversation about the wisdom of doing this sort of stuff. Of cracking open our own DNA and mucking about with it. And like I get very skeptical of people who are talking about how like, oh, we can defeat death and we can I remember a story about Pandora or something, yeah. And honestly, I feel this way about like the internet, I feel this way about like smartphones, I feel this way about social media. That we just like create, right? We just create this stuff and drop it into the populace and walk away from it and just go like, oh yeah, okay. And like we don't, okay, Milo, buddy, stop it, okay? Stop. Congratulations, Bumble, you're already a monkey man, right? Back to monkey. But like, are you aware that the only way to change humans is to affect germ line cells? See, you're getting to the specifics. Not all cells in your body are germ line cells. Look, now you're getting too specific, okay? Look, I don't know any of this technical stuff. I have an arts degree, okay? My expertise is like philosophy, theology, and artistry. Like, you want to start talking about genome splicing and all this kind of stuff. All I can tell you is that in the humanities, right? The humanities is full of people warning against exactly this type of thing. That we as humans really like to say, oh, we're going to interact with this and it's going to be great, right? We're always doing that. We're always like that, right? Where we're always looking at like the glitz and this, oh, we could do this and we could cure this and we could have this kind of thing and we could do and make this and then there's this and oh my goodness and all this kind of stuff, while like pushing away the dark, deep shadow, just taking the like deep darkness that exists within the human and inside of the human consciousness, and we just sort of shove it away and bottle it up and pretend as though that's not a thing. We never face it. We don't discuss it. It's not part of anything, right? That we don't actually want to pop open that bottle and allow the shadow to come out and reveal itself in serious ways. Yeah, Jung talks about the shadow and the shadow work and all of that. But I mean, this is like very big. Like, this is like some theological shit. Like, Jung, in my view, gets very connected to mysticism, especially later in his life, because there's a lot more going on than we like to pretend. And so, of 6 people who received the therapy starting in March 2020, 2 can now better sense light, and 1 can now navigate a maze in dim light. See, but this is exactly what I'm talking about. It's like, yeah, that's great, right? Like, that's what a wonderful thing that's happened for those people, right? But like there is a story, a play, Faust, right? So it's a German play. And it's about a man who sells his soul to the devil for eternal life. And his justifications for doing so, and the justifications that exist within this play, Faust, always come up with these kinds of conversations that think of all the good that I could do, think of all the positive accomplishments, right? And I'm especially skeptical, and I really want to zoom in on it, like really zero in on the idea of life extension, right? This is the pursuit of immortality that is always existent within humanity. And boy, do I think that's a bad idea. Like, boy, do I think that that's a bad idea. I think that life extension as a concept is going to result in Lichian style figures who are just dark. Like, humans are not supposed to live as, like, I think that we're already living too long, right? Oh, immortality is desired only by those who have never lived. Bumble guppy. Whoa. That's some deep shit right there. That's some deep shit. Or maybe just focus on making the lives of disabled people easier. I don't know. I just thought, but exactly, Famita. Like, exactly. Think of all the good we could do, right? Think of all the positive changes that we could make in the world, that the world could be a better place, and all of this sort of stuff. And but this, in my view, like the immortality thing, it comes from a place of deep fear and an inability of the individual, or to the person who is seeking it, to humble themselves to the system that they live in the universe, right? That the universal forces have said that we are here, we live, we die, right? Well, who wants to not die, right? A person who's afraid of the system that created them in the first place. A person who's living and operating from fear, primarily. That you're not trusting the system that created you. You're saying of the system that created you, I'm just going to stay here forever, right? I'm going to calcify. I'm going to just maintain this sort of banal status quo. And I'm going to live in this perpetual state because I don't view my death as a continuation of an overall positive system, or of an important part of the system. I'm actually afraid of the system, and I don't want to participate in it. You're only thinking that way under the context of capitalism. Under socialism, this is literally amazing. I mean, I definitely see where you're coming from. Like, that's what makes this kind of conversation difficult, right? And like, and absolutely, no, think of the good we can do, right? And that it would have positive impacts on people. No, I won't deny it, right? But we're just going to unleash this kind of thing into the society, right? We're just going to allow anyone. Like, No, I respect your position completely. Like, and I would hope that such a thing would actually be used for the manner that you're talking about it. Like, that would be my hope for it. But like, we're just gonna allow that. Like, we're just gonna let literally anybody, like literally anybody who has the money to be able to get a hold of any of these kits, can just do this kind of genetic modification, right? Like I just feel a bit like literally anybody. Like, how is this not the beginning of like a supervillain story? Like, how is this not the beginning of some kind of like crazy like event that occurs? It just sounds exactly like that to me. You know? That like some guy who's like, yeah, he's curing people, right? He's helping people with disabilities. He's helping people receive their sight. Right? He's doing all this kind of stuff. This person is above reproach. Right? He's doing all of this kind of stuff, right? And you know, he's also sterilizing black women in Africa because, you know, black people are the inferior race. And who's going to stop him? You know, like, because it isn't a Marvel movie. No, of course it is. If it was a Marvel movie, there would be a good guy and there would be a bad guy. But what I'm trying to press on you is that if something negative occurs in the society, it's actually most likely going to occur just on accident. Just because we think that we have control of it and we don't. That's what I'm saying more than anything. Because like that's what humanity is, right? Like that's how it works. Is that we think we control things and we don't. Right? And once you start introducing the concept of genetic hacking into the conversation, right? Like, we think we control it. We think. But most of the time we don't. Like, and I get kind of, and Adam is bringing into the conversation the idea of AI. Way worse genetic engineering is already happening that we have no idea about. I mean, yeah, the biolabs in Ukraine, for example, that they're uncovering, right? Like, I'm not a big fan of any of that either. I'm not a huge fan of any of that in the first place. And I think the thing that's so it's already happening. And so the idea is to just make it more widespread. Is that the idea? So that it's happening by like government institutions or corporations are already doing it. And so the idea is, instead of stopping that or contemplating it or discussing it, the idea is to just make it much more widespread. Like the only way to defend ourselves, yeah, the only way to protect yourself from a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun, right? And I'm not really firmly planted on this kind of stuff, but like, I get concerned that we are having these kinds of, yes, it's absolutely, it's political. And I think what's concerning to me the most about this is that we're not actually having this conversation politically, that things are occurring, and you're correct to say that it's already happening. Like, that's absolutely right. That we know about these biolabs, we know about bioengineering, we know that they're doing this kind of stuff. We're aware of it, right? The papers are out, like evidence is in. But what's kind of scary about that part of the conversation is that we're not actually talking about it, right? Like, we're not actually having a political discussion. We're not bringing to the forefront of the conversation, is this wise? I would argue that like doing experimentation on like COVID viruses or like anthrax viruses or any of that kind of stuff is not wise, right? That like we shouldn't be creating new viruses, and we shouldn't be creating new things. Like, don't drink the capitalist Marvel Kool-Aid. No, but we have to live in the world as it is. And again, I don't think that it, like, if something negative were to occur, I don't think it's going to occur due to some kind of Machiavellian force. I think it's going to happen on accident. And I just think that we set ourselves up in significant ways by pretending, like, and I think this way about the current biolabs that currently exist. Like, we don't need to imagine the future. We don't need to imagine something different. Like, when it was confirmed to me that these biolabs exist and that they're happening, right? We need to be protected on all fronts from the death cult. It's not above themselves to try and wipe us out with something like CRISPR. I mean, now we're getting into like the real dark timeline, right? Like like, for example, there's a lot of speculation around the AIDS pandemic. Sorry guys, my nose is just fucking itchy as hell all of a sudden. There's a lot of speculation surrounding the AIDS pandemic and the AIDS epidemic that was actually something that was released into the populace. I don't have a source document for that, but there is a lot of like, a disease that primarily fucked over like yeah, exactly, CIA AIDS, right? I'm not a huge fan that these biolabs exist in the first place for these sorts of things. I mean, okay, so Famita, your point, like what you're bringing to the table is the idea that these biolabs exist already, that and we should be concerned. Like, capitalist enterprises are already doing this kind of gene hacking. Like, we know that's true. For sure we do. And so you're presenting a case that says, and I'm not trying to dismiss what you're saying, but it's fundamentally saying that because these capitalists have control of these biolabs and are doing this kind of stuff, that we, as citizens, we need to arm the working class. And in this case, no, I outright said I don't have that. Bread Bunny. I outright said I don't have that. And you're right to ask for it. You are right to ask for it. I secretly hope that such a thing will never occur. We arm the working class not with guns, but with knowledge. I mean, it does kind of come... that you're not incorrect on this is the thing that kind of breaks my heart, honestly. That, like, we know that we are ruled by a class of people who are doing all kinds of nasty negative stuff to us, things that we've verified. Like, we don't need to speculate, which Bread Bunny is right to point out. Like, show us the AIDS pandemic source document. Yep, you're right. You're right, but there have been like chemical warfare, biological warfare that has been confirmed that we know all about. We don't need to speculate. And maybe Famita is quite correct that in the face of that, perhaps the most prudent position is, in fact, ensuring that the public has access to things like this so that they can be prepared and so that they can know what's going on. But I think Methane's bringing up kind of an interesting point. I'd rather arm people with the knowledge of their corruption, not focus on specifics like a technology or something. but you need to know how to combat any type of threat. Let's say, like, as we're having this conversation, let's all understand first and foremost, we all agree that capitalists suck. Genetic modding could help trans people immensely. I mean, don't get me wrong, like, I think this is a cool concept. Like, sorry guys, just getting real windy. Which is why foraging, 3D printing, and CRISPR are imperative for our survival. Wow. You're very hard-lined on this, Famita. Like, not hard-lined, but, like, passionate. There's the word to use. He's very passionate about this. Like, I definitely agree with you in terms of the foraging. I actually have friends who are already doing that. They're gardeners and foragers, and they do really good work. 3D printing. So, what do you think... Here, let me pick chat's brain on this. We're over time, but that's fine. So, I understand sort of theoretically why something like CRISPR would be useful. And foraging, obviously. And, like, but what would you use 3D printing for? Like, what is it that 3D printing... And like, Plus, I heard 3D printers can make cookies. Sold. If the 3D printer can make cookies, I'm in. I'm totally fucking sold. Trying to say, I mean, yeah, aren't we all? Well, not all of us, obviously, but like, I actually really hate this conversation. You know, I hate this conversation because it's like I would love to live in a world where I didn't need to contemplate or consider that there are these like negative actors, these people in the society that are genuinely trying to do harm to us. You know? Like, it's very... makes me feel very sorrowful. It would be really nice if we could have this conversation just in terms of, you know, it's a new technology, and should we introduce it into the society? Let's talk about it. Let's have a conversation. But while we're having that conversation, we actually do need to say, oh yeah, don't forget about the psychos. Like, don't forget about the psychos. It makes me sad. Can a 3D printer make food? Because that's the real game changer. Like a solar panel on a 3D printer that can make food. Like, that's the true game changer. But even more than that, grinning, like, if you're telling me that I can get my hands on a device that can create other devices that, like itself, that can then ostensibly turn around and create food. I mean, dude, like that, like what is it making it out of? Because, like, my genuine opinion is, like, that's a massive game changer. Like, that's like the end of capitalism itself. Like, get a solar panel with like a battery, attach it to this 3D printer, and just have this thing spitting out food all the time. Right? Like, it's like the end of capital. Right? That all they have left is, like, withholding shelter. 3D printing has always been like kind of interesting to me, but like I've never seen it take the step, and the step for me is, can it feed people? John, you can make filament anything. It's just about making the filament into a noodle shape to fit into the extruder. Extruder. Hold on. No, I'm not talking about a shaper. I'm talking like, can you take like base elements? Like, could I take a hand of dirt? Or like a hand of, I don't know, carbon or something. No, this I knew about. This I knew about. But like, this is kind of exact, like, this isn't what I'm talking about. Like, what I'm seeing here is literally like, let's take chocolate and make weird chocolate. I'm literally like, can I take like a handful of carbon or like some just rocks or whatever and just throw them into this thing and get something that you can eat? No. Like this is basically taking food and shaping it into something that is also food. I'm literally saying, are we at the point where we can take like the base elements of what the food is, like carbon, hydrogen, like all these kind of stuff, and jam it through a machine that turns it into something you eat? Like that's what I'm talking about. Because until that's what's happening, yeah. Well, and a lot of times they add complexity just to make it more complex on purpose. Like, the first meat-free steak was made from vegetables that mimics meat texture and was printed. I mean, imagine an automated science lab. That sounds cool as shit. Yeah, like, so far what I'm seeing here is just like take food and shape it into other food, or take like vegetables and make it into a different type of food. So like take food and then change it into a different type of food. I'm literally like, because that's the true game changer. The true game changer is like food. And what, because like you can imagine like walking into like a starving area with just like this printer thing and just shooting food out of it. I mean, that's sort of the idea, isn't it? Be entirely self-reliant. I think from time to time, like, imagine if you had an electric vehicle with solar panels on it and you just spent your life like roving around, and if you had a 3D printer attached to the back of this vehicle, right? You can have like a bed in the vehicle. And so you just like tool around. Anytime you want to eat, you just 3D print some food, right? Like literally like Back to the Future shit, where you're like taking banana peels and stuff and throwing it into your engine. Yeah, replicators don't exist yet, yeah. Not yet. That's the thing though. Like, you ask me, like, and 3D printing technology is interesting. I mean, no. We don't need unlimited energy. We need to harness the unlimited energy. There's unlimited energy. There's a big giant ball of fire in the sky. We're just, these capitalists are completely holding us back. They're doing everything they can to keep us reliant on digging up bones. Right? Just dig up bones. That's the way to do it. Dig up all the bones. Right? Do not do as all of the plants do and harness the infinite energy of the sun. Certainly don't do that. Famita is so passionate about this. It's so brilliant. All right, guys. I'm going to call it. I'm calling it a night. Have a good weekend. Do your best out there. Always remember, you are a quantum being walking around in quantum energy. The billionaires are spending hundreds of billions of dollars in the vain hope that you won't realize it. Just stay the good little commodity they need you to be. Rebel. Revolt. Repent. Good luck. We're going to need it.